All right, hello everybody. Welcome back to Truth Warrior. I am very excited to have back once again Bernhard Guenther. He has an amazing website. You got to check out veilofreality.com. You can follow him on X. He does regular posts across his social media and is always been engaged in talking about the psychological, the spiritual, the personal element of all of this research that we discuss on my channel. We've done shows in the past, Bernhard, on some of these subjects. We've known each other for a while, and we've both been going down our various avenues of exploring, the nature of reality, the nature of what's going on in the world socially, politically. But more importantly, what I like about your work is you're always trying to get to the root of what's going on in people psychologically and spiritually. Like you're trying to get to the root of things, whereas a lot of other people just obsess over the headlines of the day. And, that's good to an extent. But the one reason I really wanted to chat with you, and we started this conversation on X, and I had a bunch of requests for this conversation. So thanks to everybody that thought this would be of value. I think it will be. Where we were talking about what's going on right now, and I guess what you would call the freedom truth movement, where people have been waking up to many of the things going on in our world, in our governments, in our institutions, in the media, social media. And then they're starting to question history. Maybe it was the pandemic, maybe it was 9/11, maybe it was something or another that got them thinking, well, maybe I just shouldn't accept everything I've been told on face value. And then they start going down the rabbit hole. And you and I've had this experience. We've been doing this for a long time. And so we just want to I wanted to get your insight, your experience on this, and just kind of talking to a lot of the negativity, the infighting, the division, the sort of black pill doomer mentality, and the recent rise of a lot of this stuff trying to reconfigure history. And I think there's also a lot of these sort of psychological operations going on. And then we have to think about what's actually maybe a psyop versus what's being claimed to be. And it's an incredibly difficult time for a new person to navigate this space that we operate in. So let's try to clear the air. What's sort of on your mind when it comes to what's going on right now in the truth movement?
Yeah. No, thank you so much. I'm looking forward to this chat. Yeah, many different things. I think where we connected, I like your tweet you had a couple of weeks ago. I think it started when Tucker Carlson had his revisionist on, and all of a sudden that whole thing blew open, and you posted something in the likes, why does everyone think they're suddenly a World War II expert during a Psy-Op era, no less? Very important point, right? But the way I see it, I think in general, and I'm sure you can see this most likely in yourself, you seem very sincere in your integrity and truth-seeking, and I believe we have talked about this before, but if you really sincerely seek truth, your views and experiences will change over time, right?
Yeah.
So you don't, if you still have the same views you had 5-10 years ago or something, there might be something wrong. And I also feel in this process, as you know, from my work, it's not only seeking truth out there, we need to combine this with our understanding of ourselves. I'm very much more taking a psycho-spiritual lens and understanding myself when my own bias gets activated. We all have a certain bias. We just need to be aware of it. We cannot be fully objective. We cannot know the whole truth. Anybody who claims right away they know exactly what's going on, that's for me already very much a big red flag. And I'm not taking myself out of this equation. I remember when I got into this stuff many years ago, similar to you, I think David Icke red pilled me in the 90s or something. And all of a sudden I thought, I know exactly what's going on. Everybody's asleep. I'm awake. So my own arrogance got injected into all of this, the trap of superiority, as I call it. You think you know it all. And then life, if you're really sincere, life teaches you differently, and you have to eat humble cake many times, right?
Absolutely.
So what I notice a lot within myself, especially I'm big into Jungian shadow work, understanding your psychology, how your upbringing, that kind of stuff, childhood wounding, all can influence your view of the world. Even going to the basics of just a father-mother wound, I've realized how that shaped my view of the world. Or I see how this happens in a lot of truther circles. They project their father wound onto all authority, and then it comes so far that everybody's lying to us, everything is a trap, and extremely black and white thinking, which from the Jungian lens is called psychological splitting. And I think that's the danger nowadays, where there's a lack of nuance, right? And lack of holistic view, and there's too much of this absolutist view of this is good, this is bad, this guy is this guy is that. And sometimes things are obvious, but they're not always that obvious, right? And what I appreciate about your work as well is that you have a more nuanced view. You have a wide vocabulary knowledge, but there's also an integral view of it all, and especially a healthy optimism, which seems to be missing nowadays. And I'm not talking about some love and light, just like, oh, let's just imagine, right, meditate on world peace and everything will be fine. No, there's evil for sure. There's true evil. There's horrors. Yeah. But then also from a Jungian shadow perspective, I need to face my shadow, my evil, my potential for all of that, and not just externalize it all, which I see happening, the externalization of evil. But it's more nuanced with this, because what I see happening nowadays, there's this nihilism, this negativity. Everybody's a trap. There's no way out of it. Basically, everybody's lying to us, and it's too extreme. It's a bit childish, I have to say, not to try, in the sense, because only you have children. A child sees that in extremes, like one day they love you and the other day they hate you, right? Or depending on whatever happens, and that's the way they view the world. And I see this infantile, childish way in the Truther movement as well, in many ways. Similar, for example, on the basic political level. Let's just start there before we go into this whole World War II thing. For example, I see people pointing out that Musk and Trump and Tucker are the inversionists, the Psy-Op, they lead you down into technocracy, and it's the Pete Pipers, and they're contra pro Psy-Op, and they're the bad guys, and there's no way out, and all of that. And here's the thing, I had similar views, right? I was never a statist. First of all, I never believed in government. Even when Trump came in power in 2016, I was like, oh, whatever, another puppet gets into power. And even Musk, I wrote an article literally about Musk many years ago, 6-7 years ago, quote unquote, exposing him as the technocrat, wolf in sheep clothing, and all of this, right? Completely seeing him as an evil person. But now I have to say, over the years, observing what's going on, and also my own inner process, I start to see things more nuanced. So I don't see them as a person like, this is all evil, all bad. I can see Elon Musk's role in it all, how he freed Twitter, right? Yeah, he is a technocrat in his own ways, a transhumanist, most likely an atheist and whatnot, but he's not an absolute evil person, right? He has his own agenda, his own views, his own ways of, trying to fix the world. But I can see, from my perspective, and sincere will to also help the world from his perspective. It doesn't mean he's perfect, right? So that was I had to actually acknowledge to myself, oh, I might have been wrong in the past. And I think that's a lot of issues with nowadays. If people in the Truther movement can acknowledge them, then they may have been wrong about certain things, right? And not having this fixated view. Same with Trump and all of this, and going beyond this political 3D view and see it more in the context where I'm at of the evolution of consciousness, right? That everything is becoming more aware. And for me, I'm big in the work, as you may know, Sri Aurobindo, Integral Yoga, and other spiritual teachings, where it's about seeing the divine work in all, no matter how distorted the instrument is. We are also distorted instruments. We have our blind spots. I sometimes get triggered. I'm annoyed. I project, right? My views are off, whatever. But I think the trap is trying to approach it just intellectually, right? Of trying to figure out the quote-unquote matrix intellectually, not understanding how our own perception is getting hijacked. That's what I'm trying to point out. It's a psychological warfare. It's 5th-generation warfare. It's information warfare. So they're using our psychology, our mind against us to use us to create their desired reality through us. And that's what I see happening in the Truther movement in certain aspects. They become so negatively oriented, so nihilistic, where everything is a trap, everything is a Psy-Op, is a controlled op, and all of this. Through this negativity, they create that via the process of projective identification. It's another important term from the Jungian psychology. Create that reality which they claim to want to expose. So it's like a closed loop, right? Because one of the Hermetic principles, divine laws, as you know, as within, so without, as without, so within. So if you lack the inner self-work, you get caught up in Plato's allegory of the cave, the shadows, and just externalize, not understanding how our inner life is also involved in it, and most often project into the outside world, right? Our own unconscious stuff. And, once we become more aware of that, because the way I see it, everything that's happening in the world is also a reflection of our inside. You know, people always complain about the leaders and whatnot, but they are also our reflection of our inner world, right? We need to get in touch. I said something with our inner Klaus Schwab, our inner whatever it may be, right? We all have these little aspects, not to just ignore. People then confuse this too, claim that when I talk about inner work, they say, well, then it doesn't help just to meditate on your navel. That's not what I'm talking about. If you're sincerely engaged in inner work and face yourself, you have to face life with full responsibility without blaming anyone for your circumstances and act accordingly, right? And work on all levels. But if that the inner and outer work is not combined, then we get lost in the labyrinth of the matrix of the mentalization. And and as you know, it's a rabbit hole. And as much as there's a lot of nonsense in the mainstream media, there's a lot of nonsense in the so-called conspiracy world as well, especially nowadays. You have these armchair truthers sitting just on the internet all day long, going along information, completely disembodied. And the discernment not only needs to happen on intellectual level, but on a psychological level. So if you don't know yourself, you don't know your triggers, your own unconscious shadow and whatnot, you are not able to fully discern what's going on out there. And I see then within that, there are a lot of traps, which I've gotten myself into as well, right?
Yeah, same.
So just to bring it down, it's what I see myself getting out of this very infantile black and white view, like this is good, this is bad, either or, and see hey, there's something else, a nuanced happening, and maybe certain people, even if we don't agree with it, they have quote unquote good parts, we have quote unquote bad parts, just like ourselves. So can we recognize that there's also good things happening, right? But it's not according to how we think it works. I like this quote, paraphrasing from Sartre. He said that God works not according to human morality or human logic, right? We project human, we can talk about this as well, the rise of the dogmatic fundamentalist Christians, the whole other topic in itself, who
I think it's actually all related, to be honest, but yeah.
It's all related, project their own ego into God, this as if, everything is separate and God is out there and he decides what is good, what is bad, punishment, reward, and all of that. But that's not the way it works. So it's like this nuanced view, and you can only come to this more nuanced view when you raise on high levels of consciousness. I don't know, recently have you heard of David Hawkins and his map of consciousness?
Oh, yeah. Yep.
He wrote a book I read over 10 years ago, it's Power versus Force, highly recommended. And then another book, Truth versus Falsehood, where he uses calibration via kinesiology to map out the levels of consciousness. And it's a very scientific approach to spiritual research and mapping out the evolution of consciousness. But he said if you rise higher on higher levels of consciousness, your view of the world becomes naturally more nuanced, undiffused, undifferentiated more. You see the holistic working on everything. You get out of this very lower level of consciousness where everything is more like good, bad, highly dualistic, and you don't see the unity of it all. So that's why I find myself more. I would never claim to be fully awake in the true meaning of the word, right? And also acknowledging the mystery. There's a lot in the unknown. So we also need to acknowledge what we don't know. And I feel my wife, Laura, she made a good point. A lot of people, especially in the truth movement, there's fear involved in the sense people don't like to be ambivalency, like not knowing what's going on, right? Like resting in the unknown. It's really threatening to the ego. Hence, they need to latch on to a certain view. This is the way it is. Because it's kind of like a trauma response. It makes you more secure, and then they gravitate towards people who have the exact same opinion because it makes you feel safe, right? So,
wow, so well, there's so many good things in there, and I agree, and I love that approach. And for people listening that might be sitting there going, well, what about like factual cases where it's demonstrable that certain people have committed crimes or have done evil or have sided with certain, whatever. You absolutely need to do the combination of the inner work and that type of, say, external detective research where you're just trying to figure out, the happenings of the day and who's behind certain events and what's going on with our crazy governments right now. And it's all across the world right now, and all this insanity, and it's expressing itself in different ways. And I think the other thing that happens if you miss out on what you've just broken down, which is the inward outward approach as opposed to the outward inward approach, where you start within and then look at the world.
Yeah.
Meaning you're dealing with your own condition and state of consciousness at the same time as assessing the world around you, right? If you do both of those, you're going to be closer to actual truth and facts and reality than if you only do one or you only do the other. And this is why I like what you're saying there. And we need both. And you can actually see how obvious it becomes as to who is doing that process and who might not be.
Yeah.
And again, that's not to say that even people that aren't doing that process don't provide any value in their work or whatever. It's just, I think that we tend to think in terms of what team am I on right now, right?
Mhm.
Am I on a certain team? Is that team the winning team? Is that the good guys, or am I the bad? Like, and everybody, if you talk to some radical leftist or some radical Marxist or some neo-Nazi or anybody, some religious person or some atheist, everybody's coming from the perspective that they hold the correct view.
Yeah.
And yet all of these differing views cannot all simultaneously be true in terms of objective factual reality, right? So I guess what I see, and it also plays into what we see the rise of the fundamentalism again, which I look at as a regression, not a progression.
Yeah.
Um, and then seeing a fundamentalism happening within this sort of truth freedom community, about sort of a package deal that they're putting out there to new people
Mhm.
that are waking up.
Mhm.
And there's so many missing pieces of actual verifiable research and subjects that need to be researched to bring that nuance you're talking about, which brings better context to the arguments, so that when they're getting it, they're actually getting it the same way that what we call the normies that aren't awake to any of this stuff are getting a package deal delivered to them from the mainstream media
Yeah.
to install a paradigm, right? And so if you're able to zoom out and be completely honest, and I think maybe that's why people like yourself, you've been doing this for so long. I've been doing this for so long. We've both made these mistakes ourselves and experienced it. So this is why we can kind of call this
Yeah.
is we're looking at it going, oh, I've seen this pattern play out before. And
Yeah.
I'm seeing the identical pattern. And mostly what I analyze, and I'm not sure what you think, oh, that's Bernhard, but I analyze the reaction, the attitude, the behavior, the style of commenting, the trolling or whatever of the people that are involved in that package deal belief system.
Yeah.
The behavior itself, aside from arguments and all the things they're talking about, that's another tangled nest to get into. I just simply watch the behavior, the rhetoric,
Yeah.
of the people that are espousing the idea. And if they're coming at it the way you come at it, which is here's my opinion and this is where I'm at, and I'm going to give you my strong belief in it, but I will always add that little, yeah, but I might be wrong and there might be more and I'll change it and I'm not afraid to change it down the road. And I feel like I come from that same spirit and I'm not perfect at it, but that's my intention anyways.
Yeah.
And I see others, and then I see people that you speak to that remember this truth and freedom movement was supposed to be about truth and freedom, right? So that means freedom to maybe sit down, compare notes, and maybe not even agree on a subject, but still be brothers in arms against the same tyranny that we're seeing rise up.
Yeah.
So we're losing the unity. Whereas, let me know what you think. In the original days, like say, post 9/11, as people were starting in that age to wake up to the level of infiltration that was taking place, at least in the West, because that's where we live. We're like, oh my God, our government's there's something going wrong here. We can't trust what's going on. There was a lot more open-mindedness. There was a lot more of a pioneering spirit. There was a lot more of a, hey, what notes did you find? Oh, cool, that's interesting. Maybe that's true. I don't know. We were like entertaining every possible explanation for what we were seeing, but none of us were like, from what I was seeing, nobody was really fully concluding on it as much.
Yeah.
It seems like since a lot of this stuff that we were concerned about back then happening, that has happened, like post 2020, and now here we are, there it has created a significant amount of anxiety in people because it's no longer just a fun Reddit thread that you can go and read and go, oh, maybe there's some cool conspiracy shit going on. Like it's now like, oh my God, this is on my doorstep. We're going to turn into freaking Venezuela. They're going to be
Yeah.
arresting us and putting it like it became very real. And I think, and then because the West, the Western psyche, if you want to call it like that, is organically kind of all over the place. Like, we like to have different opinions, and that was the whole point of the experiment in America, was to go, you can have different religious ideas, you can have different opinions. The positive side of that was it was to help progress knowledge, but the negative side is it started to splinter everybody into these little camps, and now we've gotten to the point where we can't unify. And so the argument is, well, let's just go back and unify under the banner of, I don't know, Christianity, or let's unify under, well, we've identified the enemy as being this group over here, so let's just be the opposite of that group, and then that will solve it.
It's all the Jews.
Yeah, it's the Jews, or it's this person, or the reptile, or whatever. And I'm like, okay, we're missing the point. We're missing the point. And so the division was there. I think that it's a combination of two things. Okay.
Yeah.
I think it's a combination of these personal, the shadow aspect of individuals that are out there that are projecting onto the external world and the information they're seeing, and they're jumping to conclusions, and it's fueled by fear and anxiety. And you can see that. Okay. But the other aspect is that I think there is legitimate psychological operations in warfare, as you mentioned.
Yeah.
And the problem of people analyzing this is some people go too much in investing in it's all one thing or the other.
Yeah.
And then it becomes an extreme. And then you're not looking at the whole picture anymore. Is that kind of what you're seeing?
Exactly. Absolutely. And then, as you were speaking, very good points, David. It reminds me, pre-2000, pre-9/11, I remember those days. I think we also were more prepared for what came, because when COVID happened and all of that, the past 4 years, I didn't predict it, but it was also no surprise, right? In the sense for us of where it played out. Having said that, I think a lot of people, it's like a little bit of a paradox, because of the past 4 years, this more obvious attempt of enslavement of humanity, depopulation, and the craziness, it did trigger an quote-unquote awakening. What I mean, more people started to question what's really going on. So they got into conspiracies, started asking questions, which is a positive thing. But without the groundwork, especially nowadays with information overload, attention span deficit, they just jump from one thing, from one meme to the other. And a lot of, truthers are becoming like NPCs, just repeating something they saw in a headline or meme without diligent research or really contemplating on all of these. Number one. Number two, we know psychological warfare. I've written an article about this. That's what we're in right now. Hence, they know, even MKUltra programs, you know this better than anyone, they purposely have traumatized children, all of that, to create, sleeper cells, program them, because if you traumatize a person, they're easier controlled. And what we've gone through over the past 4 years, especially with the pandemic, is a mass, what I call matrix trauma installment program. A lot of people have become traumatized without knowing they're traumatized because of all the craziness. Hence, they're more suggestible for outlandish conspiracies and psyops and all of that. Right? So that's the way I see it. And again, why? Because lack of inner work, the disembodiment, and then getting around, it's insane what's become so popular with even reincarnation is a trap, and everything is the whole world is a prison, and all of that. I mean, I don't need to name all of them, right? And so people latch on to that for the reason I mentioned before. It's psychological safety. Oh, this is what's going on. Exactly. Now I'm fine, right? And this negativity feeds on itself. And there are other forces, as you know, from my work, that feed on that and keeps it close in that loop. And that ironically, these forces instill these ideas which are actually anti-divine and go against the truth and of what's really going on and what needs to be done. So that's, I see the issue with this trauma installment program. And Laura, we see this, my wife and I, as you know, we do these programs, Embodied Soul Awakening, a couple of times a year. We've done already 15 rounds over the past 4 years. And we see face to face what people are dealing with, right? Some people are just on Twitter all the time, information overload. But people are suffering in real time, right? They have lost loved ones to the jab and other things, and relationship breakups and hardship. It's all over the place. And I have to say, the last thing a lot of people should get into is into conspiracies. And on some level, right? Get your life together first, get yourself together, have a foundation. Jordan Peterson, He has his own issues, but he had made a point: before you start criticizing the world, clean up your own room.
Yeah.
Right? What's going on in your own life? Do you have a stable, I know people who are raving over the matrix trap and this and that and going off into all kinds of crazy fringe stuff, but they're homeless. They're living on the street. So it's like we need to be more, how can I say, just grounded in the approach and really like take a step at a time and get out of the mentalization, because I see a lot of people going insane. And then you see the feeding with the shadow projection. People gravitate towards that, right? There's certain individuals out there, as you now know, some of them who spread a lot of fear, paranoia, very quote unquote black world nihilistic, and they attract people like this as well, who are just in this very state of negativity, as a lower state of consciousness, and that's not healthy on various levels, right? And then what does it create? As you just mentioned, it creates more extremism, right? As a mechanical reaction to the woke left, we see actually now a dangerous rise of true far right, true racism and true supremacy rising as well, as a mechanical reaction to the God-denying atheist leftist movement. We see, as you mentioned, a regression of like some very disturbing medieval Christianity, which I've lost a few friends of mine. I remember this one guy I knew 4 or 5 years ago, 6 years ago. I was very close to him, and I can see through his own trauma, he got totally latched into this Christian fundamentalism and completely lost it, even condoning child spanking if they sin and all this kind of stuff, and just goes into very dark side of Christianity, which has nothing to do with the Christian teaching, as from truly like, Christ's quote unquote consciousness and living from the heart and all of that. It becomes extremely dogmatic, vindictive. And then it goes down the other rabbit hole. We can also talk about all of a sudden, with the other extreme, that all of a sudden Adolf Hitler was a good guy. He tried to save the world and rid the world of Zionism and all of that. You see this with Palestine, right?
Yeah.
I was a pro-Palestine activist many years ago. I was going around with science, Zionism is terrorism, all of this in my activist days, which were also fueled by my own wounding, right? Keeping the victim-perpetrator cycle in charge. And you see it, how it nowadays, I'm sure you're aware of that, how that Gaza-Palestine movement has been hijacked by the woke left, by Marxists. Like, there's this unholy alliance between radical Islamists and leftists. It's completely paradoxical. But they're also being played, right? Through this identification, like you said, people always want this one boogeyman. And I get always sometimes attacked by trolls that are saying, the Zionists are behind all this, or this group is behind all this, that need to pinpoint one specific group. And I think that's a trap in itself, because then you kind of like in this tunnel vision, and your own stuff gets fueled by it. You engage in projections, and you naturally become more extreme. And I see this extremism rising. Unfortunately, there's true anti-Semitism happening, right? We know they have used anti-Semitism also, obviously, to play the victim card, and so you cannot criticize Israel anymore anymore. But at the same time, there's true Jew hatred now rising more and more. And it's very dangerous what's happening there as well, right? Without like picking sides and whatnot. But people don't see how they're being played by the divide and conquer agenda, which I feel are happening from unseen realms.
Yeah, that is such good stuff. And, to get into that, it's always interesting to me how people want to pass the buck, and they can't accept a nuanced argument. Like, for example, I did a recent, I don't know, months ago, I did sort of a discussion/debate on the whole Israeli-Palestinian thing. And I was trying to bring something fresh to that discussion, because at the time, and still to this day, you just get the hard-nosed talking points from each side of that particular situation. Okay.
Yeah.
And it's that, first of all, that struggle between those two peoples goes back so long.
Yeah.
There's been evils on both sides. And it's just such a minefield to step through when you're trying to look at it. And I'm coming from outside. I don't come from a Jewish background or a Palestinian background or anything. I'm just a Canadian guy with, Dutch background, whatever. And I was trying to look at this from a human perspective and say, look, there's a deep state in Israel. Okay. I speak to people that live there, the government, just as there's one in Canada, just as there's one in America. And and they play a certain game on their people to keep them controlled. And then there's a certain game being played on the Islamic world and the Arab world by their faction for what works for them to keep the conflict going, right? Because remember, the war is never meant to be won, only sustained, because the masters of chaos, the people that really sit at the high table, I've always tried to tell people, would you be okay letting go of your vision that it's only some Jews sitting around some round table running the world and wanting to kill everybody or whatever it is, and say, well, there's people that are believing such things, but that they come from their own private religious belief system, their own private little breakaway civilization cult or whatever you want to call it, and that they don't identify with any of the religions or divisions that happen amongst the public square in humanity. They are outside of that picture. Okay. They don't believe themselves to be a part of the human family. All right. They don't act like that. They don't treat anyone like that. These types of people are just as vicious to Jews, to Christians, to Catholics, to Muslims, to atheists, these people want to see a 95% reduction of humanity. Okay. And they will wear the colors and the public costumes and say the words. And if they're in a Christian country, they're your local, Christian representative. If they're the Jews, they're Jews. They'll don Jewish names or Catholic names. They don't care. But behind the scenes, they don't come from a moral, religious, traditional standpoint or cultural standpoint. They have their own allegiances that people don't know about. And it took me over 20 years to finally understand how this all works. And when I try to explain it to people and I say, you're right, there is what you could call a global war happening or a global conspiracy. That word isn't even valid. I look at it as a war. Okay. And there is an agenda that's very dark and anti-human that's going on. And it has possessed certain people. And they have representatives that are bastions for this idea that come from every denomination and divisional camp of humanity. But if I say that idea is actually a little more uniting than to say, no, it's just those guys and we know how they are and blah, blah, blah. And then it's us against them and we've identified them and let's just rout them out. Well, here's the issue. When you try to rout out tyranny, how do you know you're not going to replace it with another tyranny?
Exactly.
And the reason why history has always been one tyranny overthrowing another over and over and over again, right up to the present moment, is because of this dynamic that we keep missing the boat on this one. And we can't understand the bigger picture that's being played, which is that we're all sort of being played off each other. And wouldn't you think that there would be a mechanism of camouflage for these types of the real high table alphas who could be orchestrating political intrigue or trying to, this is Game of Thrones going on, right? That's what we're seeing. And so when an average armchair researcher that just woke up yesterday because they found out that, Pfizer was putting out tainted shots and they were dropping people and they go, oh, now I'm awake. And then I read a couple of books and I watched a couple of videos and now I know how the entire history of the world was. And I know everything. Like, I get that people are trying to get to the truth on it, but for people like you and I, we're going to be very picky about this because of how much we've actually put into this.
Yeah.
And again, my goal is to try to find ways to unite people against the common enemy that we all have, which doesn't just come from one particular background. It's actually what you said. It's a shadow projection within human consciousness that's expressing itself on many levels. So I always go with the Solzhenitsyn quote because he really summed this up brilliantly when he was talking about, I don't know if this was in a book or if this was at one of his talks when he came to America. He was saying, because people were asking him like, well, who are the ones that orchestrated the gulags, right? Or who was this and who was that? And he said, well, it would be nice if we could just point it up the hill and identify the evildoers and then just deal with them. It'd be nice if that, and then evil's solved and we just move on with our lives. It'd be nice if that was the case. He said, but the issue is the potential for evil strikes through the heart of every human being.
Exactly. Yeah.
And there's profound wisdom to that, wouldn't you say? And what's your thoughts on that? Because I would say that tells us something. that any one of us, and this is what I got from studying cults, and I'm actually still working. I'm redoing my Cults of Death and Power series right now. I'm just going back into looking at the patterns amongst all these different cults that come from different countries in the world, different periods of time, modern and ancient, and I'm trying to find the blueprint. And I'm shocked at how easy it is to see. And you can see that people that think, well, I would never be the one in Nazi Germany cheering on totalitarianism, or I would never be the one cheering as people were getting shot in the back of the head at in Russia, or I would never be the guy that was there cheering and shouting the name of Mao Zedong while crying and waving my little red book. I would never be that person. Well, 2020 proved everybody wrong. You were that person. Deep in your mind, that's the shadow. So I think this is about passing the buck of a general knowledge of humanity that we used to have, that any one of us can get pulled to the dark side of the force at any time. And it's that's the poison pill. It's not just an identifiable racial group or religious group or this group or that group. That is the smokescreen to protect the real perpetrators of the evil that we're seeing. But what do you think about that?
No, well, excellent, because synchronistically, the quote you use from Alexander Solzhenitsyn is my opening line in a recent article I wrote called Wetiko, the necessity of facing evil within and the trap of externalizing all evil. Okay. And are you familiar with the concept of Wetiko? Paul Levy's work? Yeah, so you know that kind of that mind virus. And the quote you mentioned too is like because it's a brilliant quote by Alexander. He wrote, or he said, the line separating good and evil passes, not through states, not between classes, nor between political parties either, but right through every human heart and through all human hearts. This line shifts inside us. It oscillates with the years. So this is a very profound quote, which you see then mirrored. Here's the irony. You see this mirrored in all spiritual, esoteric, or psycho-spiritual traditions. Carl Jung talked about, the only way to avoid a catastrophe and cataclysm is if everybody would just do the inner work and integrate their shadow. Sri Aurobindo from Integral Yoga said, very profound quote that I'm paraphrasing, war is not a biological necessity anymore, but it is a psychological necessity, for our war within is expressed without. So again, we are at war within ourselves. We're in conflict within ourselves, and we just project it externally, constantly, right? And the problem is, we mentioned before, people then again are so stuck in this very infantile state, they cannot hold paradoxes, right? They have to have either or. They cannot hold the tension of opposites, which is a very important practice. Again, it goes back to Jungian work, holding the tension of opposites, not identifying with either. But from an esoteric perspective, you're all able to hold the tension of opposites. The third force emerges, right? Like a higher state of consciousness, something beyond, which we won't be able to realize as long as you're caught up in this duality, right? And it's not an intellectual process. It really needs to go deeper within yourself, and it takes effort and work to do this work, right? But here, Paul Levy, also another quote from him, from his book, Healing the Mind Virus That Plagues Our World. He writes, we all potentially have Wetiko, as it pervades and informs the underlying field of consciousness. Any one of us at any moment can fall into our unconscious and unwittingly become an instrument for the evil of Wetiko to act itself out through us and incarnate in our world. If we see someone who seems to be taken over by Wetiko and think that they have the disease and we don't, in seeing them as separate, we're falling under the spell of the mind virus. Right. And that's what you see, this projection. If you're like really like, I would never do what this other person, I could never, like, this is disgusting, like what, and that's a strong sign in context of shadow work that you have this within yourself, the potential. Doesn't mean you act it out, but the potential for evil within yourself as well as a seed. And as long as you don't face that and kind of integrate it within you, we keep projecting externally, which feeds other forces, which exactly works only in the favor of the powers that be, manipulating us from unseen realms via divide and conquer, and via projective identification, because the left definitely projects on the right, right? But the right projects on the left, exactly. Right? Or even with anarchists, I was an anarchist. They are very proud, governments are all evil, no statism, and it becomes its own ideology, right? Trapped in that tunnel vision. but then they project on statists, right? It's like the other duality, anarchism versus statism, and just always looking for another system ideology to latch onto, and they think that's the problem. If we could resolve the issues just by an informational awareness of what we think is going on, we would already be enlightened. But that's not how it works, right?
Right.
So, so what you point out is exactly the issue. It's like what I called about faith and evil within, and I can see this within myself, and it's extreme humbling process. Now, I want to share a little bit in that context. I'm going back to the map of consciousness by David Hawkins. It's really fascinating, and there are different levels he calibrated from 0 to 1,000. 0 or 1 is like the lowest level of consciousness, like bacteria level of awareness. And the highest 1,000 he calibrated as the avatars who are incarnated, Buddha, Krishna, Jesus, highest level, right? The critical threshold to breakthrough is 200 in his model, as he calibrated. And below 200 are like states very low with shame, guilt, apathy, grief, fear, desire, anger to pride. And then above 200 goes into courage, neutrality, willingness, acceptance, reason, love, higher states, right? But if very fascinating, and that's kind of like a wake-up call, in his research, he found that 80 or 85% of humanity are below 200, which is rooted in the survival paradigm, victim blame consciousness, rooted in falsehood. And he even said people who are below 200 cannot perceive truth accurately because they externalize everything. Only 15 or 20% are above 200. With the high levels, even less, because it's a logarithmic scale, right?
Well, just to jump on you just pinged something, because there's a comparative analysis would play really nice with that, and feel free to continue on it. But I was just thinking, I was reading some more stuff about this idea of mass formation and totalitarian societies, looking at Matthias Desmet and then other thinkers that were talking about this before him. You can go back to Gustav Le Bon, you can go to some of these original writers, G. Edward Griffin, talking about like what's the split between, if there's a totalitarian system, and it can be any version of one of the isms that we've seen, right? 20th century or before. You have a totalitarian system that starts to creep in. You always have a certain percentage of the population, a very small percentage of the population, that almost seems to be immediately sensitive and aware that this is coming down the pipeline. And they're like, oh my God, we can't go this direction. And they're trying to warn everybody. And of course, because they're only in like a 10% or less margin in the beginning stages, and he's like, you can compare this at pretty much 100% across the board. It's always the same thing. You have in the beginning, maybe like 90% of people just sort of go along with the status quo and help install the totalitarianism. And then a little bit more time passes. And then that sort of people start to realize, wait a minute, we went down the road too far. And so you end up with like some people think it's like a 70-30 split or whatever, where you can get to like a 30% resistance against tyranny in a totalitarian system, but you still have this mass majority of people that will just sort of like NPC, like go along with it. And Desmet's thing was to say, it doesn't take the majority to overthrow totalitarianism. It never has. But it does. There is a line that has to cross. And that means that small little minority, that 10%, needs to keep speaking the truth, keep putting the facts out there, keep showing the contradictions. And then slowly you're basically trying to recruit this, like he calls it, like 60% of the population sits below that 200 in his model. And they're just guided by whatever the trends are, whatever's the most popular, whoever makes the best memes, whatever, right? They will just go along with what's most convincing to them, but they don't actually think for themselves. No. And that's what the media is targeting. They are trying to target, because they know this too, that the vast majority of people are below that 200, but they also know there's going to be those people who are going to resist them. They're like the white blood cells in that society, right? Does that correlate for you when you're talking about
definitely this? Correlates. Absolutely. I can see definitely correlation. By the way, also the map of consciousness, people, you can easily make a dogma out of that. People maybe have abused it for spiritual bypassing, like thinking they're on a certain level or whatnot, as anything. But it correlates to that model, correlates to other spiritual traditions, the evolution of consciousness, right? Even evolutionary astrology. My wife, I think you're a little bit aware of it. My wife, she's big into, she's an astrologer that also has a similar idea, stating that 75% of humanity in a consensus state and only 25% are individuated. But
Mm.
you made an important point in David Hawkins' map of consciousness, level of consciousness, level of awareness, and how much you connect to your true self and essence, basically, right? But he made the same point that there may be only 20% on the higher level, but they have more power, more consciousness, and can affect the world more in some level than the lower states, right? Because you have more access to creative energy, more power, more consciousness. It's power versus force. You don't need to force, you have more power. So that David Hawkins said that the 20% actually balance the rest of the 80%. So the more, like you mentioned, the 20% do the work, help raise awareness, do the inner work, that will actually change the world in more in ways than anything, right? So it's not about trying to find that it needs to be over 50% or something, right? So it doesn't work that way. So there's definitely a correlation. But based on Hawkins' model, by the way, we also did recently a podcast episode about this, how to raise your level of consciousness. People can check it out if they want to understand more of that. And I also recommend reading his books because his work can be easily misconstrued. But based on his model, I can see actually a lot of people in the so-called truth movement waking up being also below 200. Why? Because they're stuck in pride, anger, anxiety, all of that. That's the critical threshold where people get stuck is pride. And what is pride? Pride is an infantile state where people cannot admit that they are wrong. It's an infantile state that they blame always external forces, beings, boogeymans for the state of their affairs, for their misery. And we see this a lot, unfortunately, in the also freedom truth movement, always the external blame. So
which is kind of interesting because isn't that the number one thing shot at what they're going after, which is this sort of radical wokeism happening right now? They like
exactly
because they're true, like that's like on steroids in your face, that level.
exactly.
But they don't realize that, when you're pointing that finger, there's three pointing right back,
Exactly. And then the critical threshold to breakthrough is courage, to have courage. And not only courage to face the world, but courage, as Hawkins said, to face yourself, to admit that you've been lying to yourself and taking full responsibility for life without blaming anyone. And that's easier said than done, right? We can still point out what's going on in the world. Like, it's not that's black and white. Not blaming others doesn't mean to put a blind eye and there's no evil and everything is fine. It's just all me. That's a very black and white infantile view as well. You can't see what's going on, how we're being controlled and manipulated in many ways, but not give your power away, but make by thinking everything is a trap and blaming them, because this is very disempowering as well. You can still take responsibility in the context of the evolution of consciousness, because that's my view. All this are lessons in a sense, right? And that's the way. And I even see this, even like Paul Levy said with Wetiko, that the poison has its remedy in itself, the medicine as well. Similar, again, what happened over the past few years, what's happening now. I think these are exciting times. It's crazy, it's dangerous, but more people are, quote unquote, waking up, becoming aware, right? Because that's how, as much as evil exposes itself more and more, it makes it more obvious, it makes mistakes, right? It's obviously. So more people are kind of like starting to question things. So this is a good thing, right? So, but this is the critical threshold, and that only going towards high levels of consciousness based on his map does require inner psycho-spiritual work. It's not just this informational awareness. Otherwise, you get caught up in that as well, right? So just that on a side note, people can check that out for themselves.
Oh, that's fascinating. And it's really relevant because you could say that evil expressed in the human psyche would also be below that 200 level, which is why it's
Absolutely.
appealing to people living in that below 200
He even
level.
said the lower level, the lower below 200 is the level of the lower astral.
Right.
Yeah.
And this is, again, it's so amazing how it's reflected, as you said, if you go back and you study, like you do comparative religious study, mythology, and then you get into psychology and you just start to see the patterns that are emerging, you'll see that there is this discussion has been going on for quite a long time in the world of philosophy and all these different areas as well. And it's interesting how many people just repeat these new memes that are popping out and these ideals and all these different things. And they have no idea the origins, like the idea you were saying before, the earth is a cage of the soul and it's a fallen world and humanity is a fallen species and all this kind of stuff. And you go, well, yeah, we definitely are traumatized species. That's for sure.
Yeah.
We definitely have some traumas in our ancient past, all through our history and in our current life cycle. So that could be one of the places that is you could look for if you're trying to get to the roots of evil and the inversion aspect and the suppressive nature of that is being held over consciousness is rooted in trauma and fear and all these things. So it gets really personal really quick. And a lot of people
Yeah.
don't like that. They
No.
want the give me more information on a Pez dispenser so that I can blame the bad guys. And even though I do enough of that to cover, yeah, there's evil people doing evil things and we got to keep our eye on that. And absolutely, people stop there. They don't go, well, what is the nature of evil and what made those people evil? Like what created a Bill Gates or a Klaus Schwab or one of
Yeah.
these people that are like anti-human at this point. They just don't they don't believe humanity is a species worth saving. They believe we are to be replaced. They don't believe in the concept of freedom. They don't believe in the concept of free will. What produces somebody like that? Well, it's somebody that lives in fear of those realities, that doesn't want that to be a reality and would prefer to have a different view. And so they've
Yeah.
created their own little dogma to try to sell and recruit, and then they've got political power. I was just doing
it's anti-divine, God denying, right? That level of consciousness.
And consciousness or transcendental. Exactly. And I just, I love this quote from Robert Heinlein, where he's saying almost any sect, cult, or religion will legislate its creed into law if it acquires the political power to do so. And
Mm-hmm.
so it's that collectivist idea that it's like, well, we see these problems, we've got the cure for the world. And so we are going to create the fashion of it and put the dogma out and try to get the consensus trance. And then we're going to try to actually do real world changes by gaining political power and power over various powerful institutions to direct the world towards this vision. And that's where you're getting your Club of Rome's and these, UNs and these things like that.
These does remind me of something as you just sharing evil in that context and how it manifests through these groups, elites, globalists, secret societies. It's not that obvious. It's not that they're like bloodthirsty murderers who just get off on killing people. From their perspective, where they're at, with their perception and like alignment from this lower level of consciousness, they think they're doing the best for humanity or the best for the world, what needs to be done, right? It's not like, you get what I'm saying? It's just like they think that they're really convinced that they're doing the right thing. They don't, in their mind, they don't have this idea, or this is something very evil I want to do and all these kind of things. No, they're righteous. They're self-righteous, right? So it's really that's how evil actually manifests, and that's how evil can manifest through everyone. Paul Levy talked about by you're extremely identified to a certain ideology. You want to push it on others, and you think you're doing the best thing possible, but you have aligned with evil. You have become an instrument of evil.
And that process is described in all of our myths and stories, and there's films and books and fiction that's written to, look at Dune, look at some of these stories, Star Wars, they talk about what turns an Anakin Skywalker into Darth Vader. Like that story is age old. It's well before some George Lucas came in and raided that, archive and then repackaged it into a film. That story of Star Wars existed in ancient Egypt, okay? Just in a different guise. It's existed throughout time. It's a very staple story. It's our story. It's the story of the unfolding human experience, is that as we are trying to go towards advancing and evolution and light and consciousness expansion, we are going to be meeting these villains. We are going to be meeting challenges that are going to come in and try to put a spoke in the wheel and trip us up. And maybe on a higher plane, on a higher level of analysis, you could say, well, this is all there's a design to that to help the process of upgrading and empowering and optimizing consciousness, right? Maybe that's the intention of the universe ultimately. But on the ground level here, the agents of evil, if you will, are many of them are working unconsciously towards those evil things. They consciously believe, as you say, that they're doing the right thing. Like Mao Zedong, no doubt, believed he was doing the right thing. The most evil people, what's her name? Andrade I was just doing an analysis of this brutal satanic cult from Brazil that murdered over 36 boys in ritual castration murders that were just brutal. And I'm like, what creates that? What kind of but consciously, those people think there's a purpose for doing that. They believe deep down that there's a purpose for doing that. They'll never admit that the real reason they're doing that is because they have a antipathy to nature. They have a deep sense of self-hate, which means they have zero ability to have empathy with another living being. And they actually want to try to fix everything to make it like themselves. That's a Jeffrey Dahmer. That's a, and it produces a psychopathy. But a Jeffrey Dahmer or a, Charles Manson is not going to sit in front of you and go, "Oh, I was such an evil bastard," right? They never believe that. Yet objectively, we can all, that's some evil shit, right? And so, there's so many different ways to get into this. But in the last portion here, Bernhard, let's get a little more technical. I want to talk about your experience, because one thing that people keep trolling my timelines with is what happened with this recent, we've got this, I don't know what her name is, reporter that's pushing this. We've got the recent Tucker interview with this guy who's, I don't know what credentials he has or doesn't have. And I'm not against Maverick. I love Maverick scholars and I'd love to hear everybody's opinion, but pushing this old trope that it's revisionist history, which again isn't always bad. There's definitely a lot of lies in our history. So there is revision that needs to be made. I have a fairly nuanced view of the World War II era. Both my grandfathers fought in the war. They were very educated on it. I grew up talking about this subject and studying this subject with my dad and my uncles, and we all were just always into it. My great grandfather was in a concentration camp in Germany. He was in the Dutch underground resisting the Nazi takeover, and he was captured and put in a concentration camp with Jews, okay, and with others, because remember, the Nazis didn't just eradicate Jews. This is one thing we have to also say. There was an agenda specifically for purity of the race. So there was levels to this game, and they also wanted to get rid of the handicapped, the mentally disabled, and all this kind of stuff. But anyways, there was also prisoners of war, and he saw things and would speak occasionally about it. He actually had to walk home after the war, by the way. He walked home from Germany, and my great grandmother.
Do you know by any chance which concentration camp he was in?
I'm trying to remember the name of it right off. I think it starts with a K. It's just off the top. I'll look it up. I know which one it is. I'll send it to you. His wife, who's my great grandmother, she told the story, and I was sitting there when she told it, and she broke down in tears trying to describe it. And she said, I'd never told, this was after he passed away, my great grandfather. She waited to tell her family after he passed away. He lived over 90. And she told the story of how right before he made it home, the entire village was swarmed with Nazi guards, and her house was kicked in, and her daughter and her neighbor were in the house, and they were all brutally gang raped by these officers. And she never told my great grandfather that this happened. And then he never told her the horrors that he witnessed in these concentration camps.
Wow.
And then so it was weird how I heard it, and my father and my mother's side, they heard it independently from both of them, and neither one of them had shared the experience. That's just my little anecdotal story. But on my dad's side, he was he was from Liverpool, England, and he was a code decipherer for the British during the war. And, he's the stories he would tell. And then I grew up sitting in nursing homes, because my grandmother would take me there to go visit my grandfather when he was still alive. And I'd be talking to these World War II vets. And so I would speak to survivors. The rest of my life, I just absorbed, and I tried to learn as much as I can. And I realized that right away, there was a lot more to the war than you're going to get in your typical World War II documentary. There was a lot going on, and not all of Germany was just evil. Like, I think Germany was targeted to get taken down by these internationalists. And you just get into it. Anyways, long story short, there's this documentary going around called Europa. Okay. And I've seen it. I've seen the series. There's actually good things in the film. They've actually nailed some interesting things that do need to be revised. However, there is also the hallmark signs of spin and propaganda towards a certain conclusion about what really went down, who did it, and trying to produce this idea that actually Hitler and the Nazis were this victims, innocent. They were the good guys. Churchill and the Jewish cabal, or whatever that Henry Ford was talking about, were all the main architects. And all Hitler was trying to do was defend himself. And then there's this new retranslated podium speech by Hitler in English that kids are passing around on TikTok and going, oh, it actually sounds like he was onto something. You know, he sounds like a very passionate, loving leader of his people. And I'm like, oh, why? Because he's a slick orator, and he was trained by Tavistock in drama and how to talk and speak to the German mind at the time. So the Germans had a legitimate gripe. They were extremely abused as a people well before World War II. Adolf Hitler himself came out of World War I, probably experiencing a lot of this, and was perfectly picked by, I think, the real architects behind the scenes, which I go to the occult level, which is beyond any certain religious group that I think is behind it. Linked to the Vatican. We get into Reinhard Galen and some others, these guys. The Knights of Malta are involved big time. And I just think that there's so much missing from that film series. And that film series is leaving everybody I know in Canada right now with the impression that somehow Nazism was onto something, National Socialism was onto something, Hitler was onto something, and that we have to unite and rout out the Jews from Canada and all of this. And I went, holy smokes, we have a lot to talk about. So that's what I've been seeing. It infected the freedom convoy movement here in Canada, the truckers stuff. Where, because again, people that was sort of, they look at it as a failed protest because we're still stuck with Trudeau. We're still in the situation. I disagree with their conclusions, but you can see how that feeling of hopelessness can lead them to start to lash out and reach out, trying to find these explanations and these villains. And so but you come from a German background. You're German, and you've had your own experiences. And I just wanted to know what your cycle was like when you started researching what went down with World War II and the Nazis and all that stuff.
Yeah. No, very important. And I also want to address what you said at the beginning. Yes, we need to question history. We've been told lies, absolutely. But what I see happening is, again, this overgeneralization, knee-jerk reaction is black and white, like that they've lied about everything. Nothing is true about official history. Similar with the NASA thing. Whatever NASA says is wrong. They're lying to you about everything. It's I'm sorry, it's very infantile, childish, that extreme black and white view, right? The lack of nuance. Now, obviously I'm German. My accent and name gives it away. I grew up in Munich, Germany, where Hitler started his career at the beer hall, where he gave this famous speech at the Hofbräuhaus. I was there many times in my younger days, getting drunk a lot before I even knew Hitler was there too. Anyway, my first experience is in Germany, at least back then when I was going to high school in the 80s. You have to, there's a mandatory visit to a concentration camp at the age of 15 or 16. And the reason I asked about if you knew the concentration camp, because maybe it was the same one. We went to the one in Dach. It's called Dachau. It's close to Munich. It's actually the first concentration camp built. So I went there at the age of 16, right? Back then, I had no idea about history. I was just playing soccer, just getting puberty after puberty and all of that, like no context. And that's when I first experienced an extreme guilt programming, right? That is definitely inherent in the German education. You've been really, really bad. Look at what you did. And this is like, you get confronted with all of that, right? And another thing I remember, so because both my parents, my dad, escaped from Eastern Socialist Democratic Germany, during the 60s, escaping to the West after he was imprisoned there for going against the party line. My mother escaped communist Poland with her family. Oh, wow. Both of my grandparents were in prison during the Hitler's time because they refused to participate in the war, right? So they were imprisoned. I think actually my grandpa from my mom's side living in Poland was actually then also forced to work in some war factory, war equipment factory during the war and something like that. But, my dad was born at the beginning of World War II, my mom towards the end, but my grandpa, they have seen a lot, right? So there have been definitely atrocities committed by Nazis. So spare me everything was just, to help the people. Having said that, I remember 1991, that's another memory. came up when there was the World Cup in Italy, and Germany won the World Cup, and I put the German flag out of my apartment, and my mom, to put this back. Like, it was so frowned upon to show love for your country, right? Mistaken patriotism for nationalism. So my whole life, and then I came to the US, and I'm dealing, in my early 20s. And given just a little background, will it make sense in the longer story?
Sure. Yeah, for sure.
Because I was always, people were making fun, the Germans, you know what I mean? And you see in all the Hollywood movies, the Germans always the bad guys and all of that. So I was never a nationalist. Couldn't care less about countries or nations or flags from a philosophical perspective. I was like, borders suck, we're all human beings. I rejected all of that, right? Due to, now I understand why I did it as well, but it was also mostly spiritual bypassing. But throughout my years, even in my early 20s, I had this like, I'm not good enough inside program. Through my inner work, I discovered that I'm not good enough program, and that like some sort of guilt constantly with me, right? Like always feeling guilty about something, even if I didn't do anything. And then I realized, oh my God, as I got deeper into trauma work and generational trauma, I'm carrying deep intergenerational German trauma of just feeling guilty, right? Because after World War II, Germany has still to pay reparations to Israel, and like, that's why they also, I forgot, this historian made a good point with this whole multiculturalism, the open borders in Europe, what happened over the past 10, 15 years, because of the German past, they just let in all the immigrants. Yeah, let's not happen. Everybody's welcome,
Right.
because of the German guilt, right? Misplaced, and then they're destroying their own country. So because nationalism is bad, and don't feel proud of your country. And I was also, when I came to the US, it was like, saw all these American flags and like, oh my God, I got almost a trauma response. This is dangerous. Like, why do you love your country so much? I was almost equating this with nationalism or Nazism, right? This being proud of your country. Now I see it differently. There's a difference between patriotism, right, and nationalism, by the way, right? It's a big difference. But I had this inherent guilt all throughout my life, right? I never questioned, really what's going on. But then fast forward, in 14 years ago, 2012, I came across this documentary called Adolf Hitler, The Greatest Story Never Told. That was 14 years ago. Similar like Europa, which I've also seen partly, but I've seen Adolf Hitler, The Greatest Story Never Told, which is over 6 hours in parts on YouTube. When I was still on YouTube, 2012, then I got kicked off quickly, right? And
I remember that one going around too. Yeah.
Exactly. And it's really fascinating. I watched it twice, so I really went deep, and it blew a lot of open. I was crying watching it. So it, on some level, it helped. I saw things I wasn't aware of, because there have been atrocities committed by the Allies too on the German people, right? There's another documentary, Hellstorm, the bombing of Dresden, right? My dad's parents lived there close by, and all of that, the mass rapes, all of that, right? And then I started to question even more, like, because I got really deep into it. I watched the documentary twice, made notes, looked into the resource material, right? I got into the work of David Irving, right? And his books about Hitler. And I also heard the similar what was talked on Tucker, that Adolf Hitler even apparently didn't intend to start the war, but it was Churchill who was refusing a peace deal, and yada, yada. Right. I also got into Ernst Zundel. I think is a Canadian, isn't he? Canadian German. Ernst Zundel. Have you heard of him?
I have heard of him. I have to confirm if he's Canadian.
I don't know if he's Canadian. He's a revisionist, but I think he got imprisoned in Canada because you guys have also strict laws, right, to question something like that.
I'm sure.
So I got into all the revisionists, and then I was also questioning why is this a thought crime? When you question the Holocaust or question certain aspects of World War II, you can get imprisoned. For me, there was a huge red flag, right?
Yeah.
There's something, because truth needs to be defended at the threat of imprisonment. So right away, like, hold on, there's a lot going on. Maybe it didn't happen as it was supposed to happen, right? So I watched all of this. I got deep into revisionism. I was literally spending dozens of hours going deep into unofficial history, revisionism. And I started questioning the Holocaust. I've seen this very famous documentary back in the days called by David Cole, A Jew Exposing the Holocaust. I don't know if you've seen that. That was part of Greatest Story Never Told as well, where he's kind of exposing Auschwitz and the fake gas chambers and all of that, right? And many other things. I actually also read Mein Kampf in German original, by the way, just out of research by Hitler. And then I got so convinced, like, oh my God, I've been lied to. Like, I bought into that German was actually, Hitler was a good guy, he tried the best for his people, he was defeating, all the Holocaust is a lie and all of this. I started even writing articles about it back then. But I have to say, back then, 10, 12 years ago, when I wrote these articles, I also made the point, hey, I was also trying to bring a more balanced point. That doesn't imply that Hitler was just a good guy, right? Because I could already see how this information is easily being abused and used by real Nazis, real right-wing white supremacists and racists for their own agenda and their own pathologies and projection. I already saw this happening back then, right?
Yeah.
But for me personally, it just helped because there's definitely been a lot of lies and this guilt programming about German and Hitler, the ultimate evil archetype, right? But then throughout the years, I lost some friends, even one very close friend who went completely off the rails and completely splitting psychologically. And all of a sudden, Adolf Hitler is a good guy, right? The absolute good guy. He tried to save his people. He tried to do good for the people. He was defeating the Zionists. And ultimately, yes, it's all the Jews' fault. This one group, they control everything. We need to get rid of them. So that's how I've seen a lot of people, and recently even more, going on this train, right? Which is very disturbing. And I have also changed my views, not only because of research, but my inner work. There's, I've then seen people getting too stuck, right? They see everything then through the lens of this aspect of history, and Zionism and the Jews are the boogeyman, the evil, right? And nothing else. And that's they take as a foundation. And I find this very, very dangerous, right? So I also have to say, looking back now, have you seen The Greatest Story Never Told, by the way?
I have, yeah. It's been a while, but I remember going through it, a couple times. And I did a lot of research on it as well,
What I look back, similar to Europa, it's actually a lot of propaganda as well. It's very, I realize I have to admit to myself, it's very emotionally manipulative, especially with the music. They have this whole dramatic music, and all of that, and it definitely gets you extremely pro-German, and the Allies are actually all the evil people, right? It's just very unbalanced, and I can see how I got caught up in that as well, right? But and nowadays, what I see happening, I was on Gap at some point. Remember Gap, the social media platform?
Oh yeah, yep.
I used to be on there a couple of years ago when all the censorship happened. But that guy, he's a hardcore Christian, prides himself of free speech. But I saw some already popping up there, very disturbing posts. I remember this one couple, this one woman was posting a picture of her and her husband. She's white, he's a black guy, and people railing on her and on her for interracial marriage. That was, and you see this nowadays also how it splits over, triggered by this multiculturalism immigration, which I know it's a problem in Europe, but all of a sudden save the white race, right? Yeah. And all of that, which is a very fine line. And I've seen more and more posts on Twitter coming up, right? The shaming of anybody who has an interracial girlfriend or husband or anything like that, like true racism that's happening, how we need to produce more white babies and all these things. And that borders lines to Nazism and everything Hitler was standing for as well, right? So I see this very dangerous trend right now with the idea that Hitler was just a good guy, with a very oversimplified view as well, and kind of throwing out the baby with the bathwater. And I agree with this from an occult level, something very fascinating I came across as well. Going back to the map of consciousness. So, because it ties into that, David Hawkins calibrated certain historical figures. So Hitler started out at 430, which is a high level of like reason and understanding and willingness and all of that, right? But then fell throughout the years to 40, which is the low domain of the lower astral, and Nazism, which as calibrates at 50, very low. And that's really fascinating. And I came across some writings again from Integral Yoga, Sri Aurobindo and the Mother, describing basically from a hyperdimensional perspective. Sri Aurobindo said that Hitler was a very gifted medium, and has been actually a vessel for a very powerful Asura, an occult hostile being called the Lord of Nations, right? Who, quote unquote, advised him, and Hitler got full of himself, thinking he's God now, has this connection to this being, and plunged him into madness, right? So there were, he literally made through his own, Nazis and Hitler, they were into occultism, obviously. So they made some sort of almost contracts, trap of agreements with these powerful beings, and then fully took them over, right? And it's really fascinating engaging into black magic and all of that. And even, let me just look this up here. According to Sri Aurobindo, Hitler was an enemy of the divine work, because Sri Aurobindo was always never taking sides politically. He says we need a spiritual revolution, but he saw the danger rising up in Europe, both that Hitler and Stalin were possessed by extreme anti-divine forces. According to him, Hitler was a medium for a very dark being, especially towards the end, throughout the war, while Stalin was a direct incarnation of a demonic entity, right, that fully took him over. So it's fascinating to see it from this non-physical realm as well, right? There are other forces manipulating humans into war, and we only see the physical manifestation, right? We can also research history, very important, absolutely. Yeah. But maybe there's also no literally occult war, non-physical levels, depending on persons' levels of consciousness, what kind of beings influence them from the lower astral realm, or the higher, more divine forces maybe inspired from more powerful beings. So that blew everything out in the open, right? So right. To see it more from that way, and I agree with you, just to close it off, that the Nazis were hunting down Jews. They were killing Jews. Maybe not the 6. You can debate all day long about the 6 million number, right? Maybe there's been strange number that was circling around even before World War I and all of that. And you need to see it into context as well, right? Just to share one more thing before I close off again from about cause and effect, because we always look at one point of history and then this caused this caused that, but you can go endless back to history and then even take into account karma and all of these occult
and
laws.
It's hard to find out what the facts are, like what's
the facts are, exactly
pieces of information that are forming an opinion. What if some of those pieces are missing, or misinformation, or like if people think that psychological warfare was just invented in 2020, I don't know what to tell them. And it's age old. So you know what I mean?
Exactly. So just this quote from David Hawkins again. He says, the rationale of the Nazi annexation of Austria and subsequent invasion of Europe was based upon a dualistic distortion of the reality of perpetrator-victim, but with the reversal of roles. Hitler's sophistry was that he proposed to right the wrongs of the Versailles Treaty, right? You need to understand World War I and the Versailles Treaty before you can even begin to understand World War II. He continues, the Versailles Treaty required reparations from Germany for its savage perpetrations and destruction of World War I, which could hardly be considered as innocent conduct. The infantile ego, he sees it from a psychospiritual perspective, right? The infantile ego expected no consequences for its ravagings and was indignant when any responsibility or accountability was required. Therefore, as paranoids do, it sought revenge for imaginary injustices. And you could argue that the Versailles Treaty obviously was over-exaggerated, not fair, whatever. But he continues, to the infantile ego, any responsibility or reparation for consequences is considered an outrage. Thus, the extremes of political positionalities, like really identified with one side, whether they are far left or far right, they both calibrate on extremely low on the map of consciousness and represent the egocentricity of the lower mind, which, as we have noted from previous levels of calibration, have a potentially extensive audience. Cultural conflict can therefore be contextualized as primarily between the representations of lower mind versus higher mind, what we talked about before, lower 200 and above 200, which have quite different paradigms of social reality and expectations. As a consequence, the far left sees tradition, ethics, morality, and intellectual integrity as fascist, and the far right sees the far left as treasonous. Perception is therefore a product of brain physiology, the presence or absence of an etheric brain, maturity, the calibrated level of consciousness, and spiritual evolution, all of which are collectively in accord with the overall evolution of the consciousness of mankind itself. So basically what he's hinting at, like, and he talks somewhat about in his talks, like you mentioned, to get all the facts historically, right, to see when what happened what, it's almost an endless rabbit hole, because you have to go back further in time, and this, like, because we're caught in this cause and effect, this led to this, led to this, led to this, but we just get this one nutshell, this one view, tunnel vision, and that's what a lot of people jump onto, like I did. You just watch this one documentary, like, oh, we've been lied to about everything, with no context, and you just circulate between two sides, either you're on the left or the right, and you're still identified with a certain view.
Wow. Yeah. So much there. And interesting. I mean, getting into, sort of a paranormal description of these things as sort of like hosts for some toxic entities or consciousness. There's that idea. Some people, if they don't like going there, they can look at that simply as the adoption of bad ideas, right?
Yeah.
And belief systems. I personally think Hitler was a Manchurian candidate. And I think that this is what happens, because we've seen this process take place with other figures as well, where they start out seemingly to be quite genuine and maybe even brilliant and maybe humanitarian, or maybe just they really do care.
Yeah.
And then something changes, right, down the road, and over the deep end we go. And I've even seen this process. This process took place with people like Jim Jones, with other people. Now, I don't know specifically where everybody was at, but people don't think about these as other possibilities, that people change over time. Like in the beginning,
Yes.
you were mentioning people like Elon Musk or Trump or some of these other guys, and people will go to their past and go, well, look at these things, look at these statements. I'm like, well, you're missing, if you're going to conclude the guy is like literally the Antichrist incarnate, you're missing out the fact that you're on a platform right now that he owns, that's allowing you to discuss this, where you can't have this discussion anywhere else. So at the very least, you can go, well, thank you, evil person, for allowing me to have this platform to share this information about you. And you can then go, well, then I will utilize that person towards something positive, right? And also, you're missing the idea that people can change. People can change sides. People can change opinions, and they can go from, being what you would call a normal, healthy person to being somebody that's deranged, who's lost their minds, who's, completely on a different spectrum now. So people don't think about that. And then the one thing that I think about, though, is really hard here, or really gets to the heart of it, is the people surrounding the Nazi party, the people that funded it, the people that created it. And if for just to throw a couple little details at people, that they want to get into this, if you want to talk about some of the people you should be looking at, you should be looking at these guys who were all members of the Knights of Malta, which is something that I've been looking at in my Cult of the Medics series as being definitely integral part of this architecture of control. And they're very much linked to the Vatican. They're known as the religion. They are the Knights of the Vatican. And they, after the Templars were disbanded officially, after the whole thing went down with that, they basically, the Malta Knights, the Knights of Malta, eventually absorbed a lot of the Templars into their order over time as they were dispersed, right, through Switzerland and Argentina and everywhere else. Or as I guess be Spain and Portugal and wherever else they were fleeing to after the church put those demands out to get them arrested. And so there's a whole history that's linked there, where there was a changing of power. And I actually think the Templars never went away. They stayed underground. And then what was the Nazi party but a birth of the New Templars? They were called the New Templars. And that's why they donned the regalia, the symbolism, and even a lot of the rhetoric and rituals of the Templars. And it has to do with this, this financing and this propping up by literal secret societies that help birth the Nazi party. The fact that the Nazi party specifically was a national socialist movement. It wasn't a movement that was centered around the freedom of an individual, obviously. So they were just as tyrannical with their own as they were elsewhere. You have the Nazis to look at with people like Hermann Goring, Reinhard Gehlen, von Papen, Haushofer, who, if you want to get into the occult direction, if you get into, I think it's Karl Haushofer, if you get into his history, he would be your connection on the occult history of the
Mm.
Nazis, which the mainstream likes to constantly go, no, there was no occultism going on. They're obviously obsessed with the occult. You can
Yeah.
see it in their symbolism, the whole thing. And even in their interests, and the fact that they formed liaisons with the Orient, going into the Orient. They were trying to find the Arctic homeland. They were, looking for the lost Ark. They were looking for this lost knowledge, and they
Yeah.
were also working in tandem with a lot of these Eastern groups. And there were even connections between the Islamic world and the Nazis that I started to bring up into the research I was talking about when it comes to the current situation over there. That there was an entire campaign there was a meeting between Hitler and the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, and they basically formed an alliance and allowed Nazi propaganda to be blaring from the radios and the communications going on in the Middle East at the time.
Mhm.
And today, when you look at the symbolism of a lot of these groups, like these terrorist organizations and whatnot, they're either openly communist or they are openly espousing Nazi ideals and even flying the Nazi flag and everything else. A lot of people don't know about this. And that just has to do with this history of the influence that took place during that time. And
Yeah.
it's also very much about the people behind all of this. And this is where I get, and I say, guys, I keep saying this, you have to go look at people like, I think it's Lyndon LaRouche's daughter wrote a great book on Hitler with like just the most extensive documentation. You can also get into Professor Anthony Sutton on this, where he has the literal receipts, the money transfers to these various banks from American and British banking families to finance and prop up Hitler. There were also some
Wasn't the Bush
German banks.
family involved in all that as well?
Yeah,
At some point?
Prescott Bush, right?
Yeah.
You had the Rockefellers, of course. You had money pouring in from the Vatican and the Knights of Malta. In fact, I think it was von Papen who was the direct liaison with the Vatican, and the whole point was to try to get the Catholic vote for the Nazis in Germany, right? And so he was like the one trying to get all the Catholics to say, this is the new revival of the Christian West here. This is what we're doing. And this is why Rome is supporting us. Okay.
Yeah.
And so if you know any of my opinions on the Roman cult and the papal families and the history of the Vatican, which should be separated just from some, everyday Catholicism, these are very high level elites that were involved in financing this. And then there were also some very, very elite, powerful, and wealthy Jewish families that were also involved in financing the Nazi party. And there were many
Mhm.
reasons for that, which is very interesting, right? So this is what's interesting, is that you got to get into the occult connection behind it. The fact that I think they were an experiment. The Nazi German, the National Socialism of Germany was an experiment that was part of a greater experiment by these more elite, royal, black nobility families that were trying to see what's the best recipe to create totalism in the West. So you had to do 3 experiments because they realized demographically, you're going to have a total different audience in Germany than you're going to have in Russia and that you're going to have in the USA. One dogma won't work for all 3. So you want
Mhm.
to install the same unifying dogma, which is socialism, which, when you know what that means and where that was birthed from, that's the collectivistic doctrine of having the government power control the means of production. So it's a control paradigm. And you need to install that in countries that don't want that. They want maybe a pie in the sky version of it, but they don't want the version that these psychos and maybe in Switzerland or whatever wanted to do. So they had to test it out. And I think what they did was the Bolshevik revolution, in which is always, oh, the Jews sponsored it and everything. Yeah. Were they radical revolutionary left-wing Jews that were poisoned by the promise of communism? Was there maybe some reasons historically why some of these Jews flocked to that movement to begin with? Nobody gets into that nuance. They just immediately assume it's,
Yeah.
and then you don't go to the financing of it to find out that it was it was industrialists from America and Britain that financed the rise of the Bolshevik experiment in Russia. And I think that was done to target the lower working class, which is why communism is always appealing as a class struggle, and it appeals to the lower working class. In Germany, that wouldn't fly because it was a bit more of an elitist society. It was it was a very industrialist society, and they didn't want to have anything to do with like what was going on with the poor Russians. That's how they looked at it, right? So they went, we need an experiment that's going to appeal to the middle class and the elite classes in Germany. So that's why they crafted fascism, which was just a slight variation when you look at the principles of it from your average communism or socialism. Now, in America, they're not going to swallow either of those pills because of the whole culture of America was bounded on individual freedom and property rights and less government and all that, right? So they snuck in with FDR with the New Deal. And that was the sort of soft socialism. They're like, let's see if we can get a pinky toe in the door of America. And if they can start buying that, they want all of these different experiments to coalesce into what we're now seeing as this world government, Great Reset, WEF, UN thing, right? But in order to achieve where they've gotten to now, to be able to apply this recipe to the whole world, which has many divisions, right? Culturally, religion, whatever, you need to first test all these things out and get the right data so that you can hyper collectivize the entire world under this one ring of power. So that's my brief explanation. I've done it in a few shows. And Anthony Sutton, Professor Anthony Sutton, he was a member of the Hoover Institute. He was an intellectual, and he did a lot of research. And he found the receipts of the actual money transfers of the same players who were a mix of bankers, Westerners. There was different types of people involved, Catholics, Jews. Like it was a mix of people that just so happened to have this internationalist vision that were financing those three experiments simultaneously from the same people. So you got German socialism, Russian socialism, American socialism, three experiments run differently, but financed by the same people. What does that do to this sort of kindergarten, I think, notion of what we're told by these sort of radical neo-Nazis today? Is that they're missing that piece. They're missing the high table. They're going down and just studying the gang warfare that took place. And just to give you an idea, real quick, I got a quote from Goebbels. Okay. He said this, because everybody's going to go, well, wait a minute, Dave. The Bolsheviks and the communists were hated by the Nazis. And there was like a war. But there was obviously Russia was the one that helped win the war. If we didn't have that, we'd probably still be dealing with this. Well, they didn't really win. We know the Nazis went underground, but that's another tangent. But the thing is that this was just gang warfare on that level. The people sitting there, the puppeteers, are sitting there waiting to see which one is going to win out, right? So Goebbels sums it up. He says, our struggle against Bolshevism is not a struggle against, but on the contrary, for socialism. A struggle inspired by the deep conviction that true socialism can only be realized if the most vulgar and most compromising offspring of socialism is first eliminated. So what is he saying to you? He's saying, we want the same thing as the Bolsheviks. We want totalitarian control, but we don't like their version. So therefore, they're like the vulgar version of what we're doing. So you see that elitism. We're just better than them, right? So, and then if you read the Bolsheviks, they're going to be shooting arrows at the Nazis, okay? But behind the scenes are the occultists petting their cats and going, this is fucking great. Let's take some notes, see what works most effectively and who actually wins the war. Well, who won the war? Russia and America, right? So they go, okay, let's pull the top Nazi guys, put them into America and all these other places. Let's kind of put the Bolshevik communist thing on ice for a little bit because the world's going to have to recover from that. They're not going to buy it. And let's sneak it in slowly. Disguised as for our brothers and socialism, and we're going to go kumbaya, and then we're going to emerge as a world power. And that's where you got to get into Professor Carroll Quigley and what he discovered with his exposure to these meetings with these globalists, how they were trying to combine all these isms and create the right recipe, and that they were looking for mass depopulation, they were looking for complete totalitarian control, and they were looking for the Übermensch. They were looking for the new man, the new human. Right.
Which ties also a bit into transhumanism in this day.
And there you go. Exactly. So that's my reading of it, you know.
No, that's all. Thank you so much, David. That I'm connecting so many dots. But you're right. I like what you said. Even this documentary, Europa, The Greatest Story Never Told, or all the other revisionists I've read, it's mostly just describing the superficial gang warfare, right? What's happening, and not going deeper into the finance of who's controlling what really on the more hidden levels, and especially in the occultism and all of that, which the Nazis were obviously into. And interesting, I heard about this before, that, you know, the communism in Russia or the Nazism in Europe. Germany was a trial run, right? In the sense of just figuring out what works best. It's kind of like an experiment. You're right. And what the US are dealing with, what we're seeing now, it's almost like a hybrid of neo-Marxism, Nazism, because we all know, not everybody, but Operation Paperclip, right? The Nazis, let's bring them in here. And then you have Frankfurt School, Tavistock, infiltrate, already in the 60s with Marcuse and all of that into the universities. And we see the result now, right? The communist infiltration. So
well, just to pause you there, Bernhard, look at the alliance right now with Kamala Harris's administration that she wants to create, who's literally just giving you the exact Marxist rhetoric that we've heard a gazillion. It's shocking, actually, that she's so bold about it. So you would consider her, and even Trump called her out on the debate, which was beautiful. He's like, oh, she's a Marxist. And she's kind of like, well, I'm not going to deny it. And so you got that. But yet, who's supporting her? Who's endorsing Kamala right now? The Bushes, Dick Cheney, the Nazi guys.
Exactly.
Right? So there's an alliance between the Nazis and the communists. Okay. And then I have to point this out when it comes to all of this stuff going on with the Israel-Palestine thing. And this is what I pointed out. And I know it's a soft spot for people, but you need to know the facts. What happened to that? Now, this has nothing to do with any specific, like, I'm not sitting here promoting mass genocide of people, like innocent people, like at all. Okay. That's a whole other tangled web. I'm looking at what the protests that have come to Canada that are clogging up our highways right now, all over Europe, all over America with the Free Palestine. How, even if you want a free Palestine, even if you're on that team, your movement has been absolutely 1000% co-opted by these communist organizations. Okay. You go there, they are literally flying the communist flags. There's the raised fist and the hammer and sickle all over their regalia. The same symbolism is in the trans protests. It's in the feminist marches. It's in all these things. So they might even be taking what you might believe are legitimate issues out there, and they're infiltrating and co-opting them, just like they did with Woodstock and all the hippies and everything else, because this is about galvanizing people around the ideas that are wanted by the high table. And when you know the symbolism and you understand the rhetoric, I mean, look at Black Lives Matter, another example, which was a movement to divide America and start the race war, right? Well, they're openly saying they're Marxists. They're openly flying communist flags. It's everywhere. But I think that, again, is the technique that they used back then, which was get the lowbrow version of this at the young, which is the communist level. Those are the guys that get shot first when the totalist regime comes in, by the way. They don't understand that. But they're used as a weapon to get to the next stage. Meanwhile, then you have the elitist version, which would be your fascism and your more elite level socialism that's coming in. And don't you know, Bernhard, I did a whole series called The Occult Conspiracy. It's a book. I based it off by someone called Michael Howard, who wrote very detailed about the history of secret societies. And he starts with the French Revolution and moves forward. And he identified where socialism and communism and fascism, all those ideas were born. And they were born in the belly of secret societies. You've got the Philadelphians, all these different guys. And so think about that. Political philosophies were born in the world of the occult. And what were we saying about the Nazis and the communists? So I'm sitting here trying to tell people, look, I hate all of the isms. I hate all of the totalist regimes. There's different flavors, but it's all the same Gatorade in the end. They want us all enslaved to this one system. And they just have different ways of having a PR program for different groups of people. So don't fall for that, and don't fall for the division. When it comes to the Jewish thing, what are you going to say with all the Jews in Western history that have actually contributed immensely to the cause of freedom and great ideas and good philosophy and good history, and fought for the West? And because they know what their best interest would be, right? They have this, or they can go and hang out with Islam in the Middle East, and that's not going to turn out too well. So there's good and evil in all of it. And then for the Christians right now that are getting all up in arms and playing the virtue signaling game, I hate to bring it up to you, because I would say I don't have a problem maybe culturally identifying as Christian, right? On a cultural level, and the principles and the values and this and that. And I look at it as a more of an esoteric perspective on Christianity, more symbolic story, and the qualities and everything. I'm not attached to the figures of the story. But either way, the problem is there. What you were talking about with this split, this extremism has risen, where these Christians are not following their own teachings of, well, take the plank out of your own eye before commanding your brother, or you without sin cast the first stone. Let's not get in to the crimes that religion has brought to the West and the world. Okay. So nobody gets out of this innocent, and don't pretend that one is more than the other. It's the same what I would say to the leftists when they're trying to say, you remember you're talking about the German guilt. Well, what about the white guilt thing in general now, right? Where they're trying to say, oh, white people, you're always racist no matter what, and you're this and you're that. They're trying to engender guilt in you, right? So I guess I'm just saying I'm seeing the same patterns in all these different movements. And I believe you nailed it, that if you get rid of all this political crap and you just go to the individual level, we are dealing with the trauma of the psyche. And the elites know how to manipulate and play you on that level.
They play on that. Exactly. Well, very well summarized. I'm curious on that note. I'm curious your view, because back in the days, I even wrote an article, The Illusion of Choice, two wings of the same bird with the political setup and everything. And I think it was back then, especially with the Bushes, with the Obamas, with the Clintons, like they've been in power for the past 30 years, by the way. It's also fascinating. It was the past 30 years was Obama, Clintons, and Bushes, and they're all like having a happy time together. And everybody's blaming Trump, and he was only in power for 4 years with no wars. But nowadays, you see a lot of people in the truth movement also getting on my case, because while I never hardly identify, I'm more detached. But I see, based on what you just shared of Kamala Harris and the puppet she's for the forces of this really neo-Marxist agenda, collectivism, and all of that, that in this case, it is important that Trump gets into power, from my point of view. And I'm not saying, then people get on my case like thinking that you can vote yourself out of it and he's a savior. No, I'm not saying that he's a savior. My point still remains that it's also level of consciousness, what's happening in the world, your own inner work and all of that. He's far from perfect, right? I don't agree with, even what people get on his case is Operation Warp Speed and the vaccines, right? But then people zone into this tunnel vision, which I was also at first like, I don't get it. What's going on? He has his ego. He can admit it was wrong. But then I don't go all the way now to the 5D chess Q people. Like they can also be, fall into the trap of positive projections. Like he can't do anything wrong. But I can also see his position when he was in the middle of his administration. This thing hits. If he would have just gone completely anti-vaccine and all of that, he would have gotten impeached or kicked out. Like it's not, wouldn't it be practical possible? So it's so easy for an armchair conspiracy theorist saying, well, why didn't he do this and that? And he didn't take down the deep state. He even admitted recently, as Robert F. Kennedy Jr. said, admitting to him that he had some mistakes in the people he surrounded himself with, because he's new to it too, right? But what is your view with what's happening right now? Because I think we're in very big trouble if, out of who knows, Kamala comes in and instead of Trump. And I'm not implying that Trump's going to save the world, but then other people say that Trump's going to bring the technocracy and fascism and all of this, even some truthers, right? But what is your view on this right now in this political dilemma we're in?
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. I mean, I oscillate a little bit. I sit on the back. I sit out in the fringes trying to watch and see how things are playing out. And I kind of have had my own little pet theory about how this all kind of connects and ties together. I don't really get into it a lot because I don't have like smoking gun evidence for anything that I'm thinking on this. It's sort of it's hard to say. It's almost like an intuitive feeling of just sort of navigating all this for so long and watching things unfold. And one of the biggest tells is, where are the shots fired? Literally now and figuratively. Where are the shots fired? Where are they shooting the most? And I'm talking about the people that I've always known, the organizations, the institutions, the people funding all this. I know where they want to get to. And when you know when they want to get to, and you start to see the rhetoric of that agenda coming through all these different vehicles, and then you see a totally different rhetoric coming from someone like Trump, And then you see the way the whole system reacts to someone like him. And even though he was probably going in acting a little bit and being softer on certain things just to kind of keep, so you, like, that kind of situation wouldn't happen, right? And so I think that I agree with you. Love him or hate him, the West will not exist if Trump loses this election or something happens to him. It's going to
Yeah.
very, very quickly unwind. And it's because, not just because of bad policies of the other side or anything like that, but because of the reaction of the over 100 million Americans that support Trump and the people all over the world, in the Western world, that feel very deeply that whatever happens in America is going to very quickly permeate into Europe, into Canada, Australia, the entire Western world, which right now is hanging on by probably one fingernail. Like Canada's hanging on by one fingernail when it comes to being able to preserve true freedom and prosperity for our country. We're heading the way of a Venezuela type situation down the road. And the tyranny we experienced during COVID will seem like a vacation compared to what these types of people will bring in, absent somebody standing in their way. And so people will go, "Well, that's Dave. You're doing hero worship, and you're giving Trump." And I'm like, "No, I'm just being logical at this point." I wish I could sit back and just go, "Yeah, humanity's ready for having no government and no rulership and no accountability. The human race is just totally ready to, operate everything by their own." And it is kind of coincidental that we're bringing in Haitians right now from Haiti into America, when Haiti itself is an example of anarchy when applied to a population that just isn't quite ready. And I don't think we're ready anymore here, because we just saw how easily people can get bamboozled during 2020. People that were supposedly awake, we realized fear is a very powerful weapon. And so I'm not saying we need to be having dictators, but we need some kind of organizational structure, and it definitely needs to change. And the swamp must be drained. And I'm not saying Trump's going to be the one doing it all by himself, but nor was that ever the idea of having at least a democratic republic, right? Was the idea that no, the people have to participate in this. So for people to pin it all on Trump, did Trump mandate that every mom go and bring her child down to the local Walmart parking lot to get their child injected with an experimental shot?
Exactly.
Did he force them to do that, or did that stuff start to happen? The mandates start to come in afterwards. He was always against the mandates, with the vaccine. And I was horrified, and I want him to come out and just be like, yeah, the whole thing. But interesting alliance with RFK Jr., wouldn't you say?
Yeah. I'm
And
saying that
interesting timing, right?
exactly. Absolutely. And I feel that's, a lot of in the conspiracy world, who are just so overly focused on like the 3D aspect and lacking the psycho-spiritual vision, the spiritual vision. And I'm not claiming that I'm all enlightened, have a spiritual vision. What I mean by spiritual vision, have a certain understanding and concept in terms of evolution of consciousness, that things are not how they seem they are, not only in a negative sense, but sometimes in a positive sense. And there's such thing as divine providence, grace, and all of that. And of course, then the right Christian, they project then Jesus attributes into Trump, and he's anointed by God, and that's the other extreme. But the divine works in mysterious ways, and going back from my own process, I see also, and reading more the Vedas and spiritual teachings, that the divine uses anybody as an instrument despite the distortions and karmic setup. It's not absolute evil, doesn't even exist, by the way, right? It's just the absence of light.
This is huge, and I'm glad you said it better than I was trying to say it. This is like, it's like in Christianity, they'll say the Lord works in mysterious ways, right? And whether you are a Christian or whether you're just spiritual and understand how that transcendental works, right? How consciousness works, is that if we are to accept that there is no good in the world, and that there is no good in any of our institutions in the West, okay, they've been so corrupted that it's hopeless at this point. Okay. Who actually benefits from that idea? Is it the patriots, the Western person that wants to preserve their way of life and provide, does that really benefit you, that idea? Or does it benefit the enemy that has a campaign that's been going on for at least 60 years or more to demoralize the West. I mean, did anybody watch the Yuri Bezmenov interviews and take any notes from that about how the playbook works? You know, with that old playbook known thing, you don't have to have access to classified documents to know what the playbook is. These people put the playbook out right in front of your face. The playbook is demoralization, destabilization, use crisis and emergency consciousness, and then install a new normal. That's the playbook. That's the playbook that's been used for thousands of years. Why change it? So if I'm to say, for me to have any hope that Trump or a Musk or some of these figures that are people that are sort of outside of the normal political churn machine, right, that are actually throwing blows at this system, showing the people that the media is corrupt. Like Trump showed America the level of corruption within the DOJ, the FBI, the courts, the Supreme Courts, the contradiction, the whole thing. Like even just that debate shows you there's collusion with the media and political parties to change the outcome of an election. That's illegal in America. That's illegal, right? And then we can get into the election fraud thing. So his existence, whether you love him or not, whether he's made all the perfect decisions or not, or whether he's a part of a military operation or not, his existence since 2016 in the political sphere has turned the apple cart and disturbed this power structure we've been describing so much that they are throwing all their money at the lawfare. They are putting all of their cannons pointed at him. They are trying to use him as the boogeyman, the whole thing. And I sit there and I go, well, that's really interesting to me that even when he wasn't the president, he is still blamed for all the problems by the current president, who's literally sitting on a beach and doesn't know what his name is. Right.
Exactly.
So there's that. And then I go, what if, like, I say to people, do you honestly believe that after the invasion of Iraq and Afghanistan, after 9/11, after JFK even, right, was shot, and the whole thing and all the evils we've seen happen in America, after that whole thing, do you think there were no patriots and good human beings that wanted to preserve truth and freedom and American values? Do you think that they don't exist like at all? Or do you think that they might form their own alliance behind the scenes to try to fight back in the way that they did in the founding of America, and how that small percentage we were talking about in totalist regimes, the 10% or less, would fight back, right? What do you think that looks like? So are you telling me that every single guy in the military is a Satanist? An Illuminati? Are you saying every guy in intelligence, every guy working the CIA and the FBI? Well, Ted Gunderson proves that wrong, doesn't he? Former director of Los Angeles FBI was the one that told the world about Pizzagate and satanic ritual abuse and human trafficking before it was cool, right? All the shit we saw posted by the Q thing, we already knew. We already had this.
Exactly. That's another thing. The Q thing actually, you know, I still feel it's legit in its own ways. I'm not like attached to it, but now even as they're coming up, there's a lot of future proofs past, by the way, if you look at some of the drops. And
it's actually getting pretty insane.
It's really fascinating. And also and people are, I mean, that's a whole other topic. We did actually a couple shows on this topic years ago, which we censored on YouTube. But without exception, anybody who says that Q is a Psy-Op, this and that, talk so much nonsense about Q that Q never implied, never studied the drops, none of that, right? So I cannot take there's a lot of nonsense within that movement got hijacked with JFK Jr. coming back and all kinds of.
Well, of course, but would they go after, let me ask you, those people listening that would go, would you go after Julian Assange the same way? Would you say that Julian Assange is a Psy-Op? WikiLeaks and everything they were discussing? Because actually, if you actually know the history, remember WikiLeaks came out first, right?
Yeah.
And then he got arrested, the whole thing, or he extradited or whatever.
With the Pizzagate that came out through WikiLeaks too, right? And then
and what came out through WikiLeaks? Corruption in the election system, the human trafficking thing, the weird obsession with this pedophilia in Hollywood and amongst political elites in Washington. So many of these themes that started to come out in these Q posts. Now, many of those Q posts down the road, some people say some of those later ones must have been co-opted or whatever. I don't see, none of that bothers me, because I look at it and I go, if certain information that is there to wake people up to what's going on, and then it actually happens, gets leaked out to hundreds of millions of people around the world, at the same time, and helps them actually start to take action. And that's the other accusation. They go, anybody that's just reading stuff on the internet, all these truthers, where they never do anything with it, which means it's a psyop to keep them from doing anything.
Trust the plan,
like,
be docile. This is nonsense. What I've witnessed over the past 4 years of people like becoming active, speaking out, right? We see this with all the people also we attract to our programs, how many people have been almost indirectly gotten woken up because of this information.
That's right. And then I go, what kind of action? And this is what I always get to, Bernhard. Let me know if you see it too. All these people that say, especially these black pill types, you know, oh, there is nobody's gonna do any good. They're all evil. They're all part of the Illuminati or whatever. And I'm like, well, and then they're saying you're doing nothing. And I'm like, well, what kind of war is this right now? Are we on a field running through it with muskets shooting at each other? Like, what do you want? Like, even the trucker convoy in Canada, we did the most peaceful protest in history. And then they go, look, it didn't work. We got to do something else. Right. And I'm like, oh, that might be a government agent right there asking you to do something else. What do you think that something else is? They want you to take up arms and get in the street and go after they want that. That's what this deep state wants. They're trying to instigate chaos in the streets because they benefit from that. So when I hear people saying you did nothing, yet here we are, how many more people woke up thanks to the information that has hit the memes, the video clips, the shows, the research. Everybody's now hyper analyzing like opening ceremonies of the Olympics, and they're watching these debates and they're seeing the little hand signal. Everybody's into this now, right? And you're telling me nobody woke up. We wouldn't have known about any Epstein client lists or whatever if it wasn't for patriots that were putting this information out on blast during a time of censorship, right? So don't tell me we've been doing nothing. We've just been working in the domain of where this battle is being fought. This battle was not fought like in Ukraine and Russia with like tanks and guns. Like that's not where our battle is being fought in the West. Our battle is being fought with information, 5th generation warfare, social media. That's the domain the enemy chose. Okay. Yes. So that's where we fought them. So we didn't just do nothing. We did that. We fought them back on the territory. They said, hey, let's go have a fight on the internet. And we said, hell yes, let's go. Right. So that's to me the most ridiculous thing. Okay. Now, does that mean people that came across any of that information, or even forget about the Q stuff, just even the truther stuff, right? That they maybe watched that and that froze them and they didn't do anything? Of course. But you can't just then once again go to an extreme position that everybody that is trying to do something and give people hope is somehow part of the psyop. To me, the psyop is the people trying to take your hope away, to try to take your fight out of you and say, everybody's evil. There's no chance of any saving grace. And you know what? You know where they start to go right away? I know it. That's how I know who these people are, because they go quickly from that point to, you know what? The whole Western experiment needs to be reset anyways.
Oh, wow.
Well, so America needs to be reset anyways. It was already evil. Look at all the evil shit.
Yeah, even like going back to like, the evil founding fathers, they're all part of Illuminati and secret society and all of this.
I'm like, sorry, who are you working for again?
Extreme. Yeah.
I'm like, who are you working for again? What side are you really on? Because, and again, demoralization. How do you think that
demoralization
works?
So, that's what I can address on that real quick, because you made some really excellent points. Because yes, there was an awakening, helping become people more aware, but because of 4 issues I mentioned before, of the unconscious trauma and people not engaged in any inner work, no psychological self-awareness, it turned to the other extreme, to the black pill mindset. Like you said, nobody believes that there's anything good actually in any of the institutions, so people behind the scenes could do something good. All of a sudden, everybody's a controlled op and psyop and an evil person, right? And without mentioning names, but a lot of people, lump Tucker together with Musk and Trump, and they're the evil inversionists and technocracy, and they're all against us. And then their solution is like exit the matrix, build your own community, and like this externalized utopian view, which will never work out, right? Because as within, so without, the Wetiko mind versus keeps going. You cannot just like remove yourself. And by the way, a lot of these people, anarchists, who keep talking shit about the US and all of this and that, I want to suggest to them, go found your own anarchist movement, or just community. There's some out there, move there and just live that. I've seen it over the years. Laura has seen it as well. She lived on Vancouver Island, out of all, and like self-sustainable,
Yeah,
like
there's a lot of one. Yeah.
thing of that, and it's a disaster in so many ways, right? Because of people's issues and all of that, they just bring that Wetiko virus with them, and many of them disintegrate infighting and all of that, and they externalize the externalization of the matrix, right? And then you come into black pill territory, and like you mentioned, it's very demoralizing, and people feed into that, and it's like you said, you beautifully explained how this actually totally feeds into the hands of the quote-unquote enemy, right? We destroy ourselves within ourselves. And then people say, well, you know, Bernhard and David, if Trump would be really a threat, they would have easily taken him out. I've heard this argument so often, like, it would have already, you know, it's not a problem to take him out. And they literally think that everything is a stage, everybody's in on it, it's just a big show. Like, you give them way too much power.
Yeah, that's
right?
it.
That's way too much power. Like, they're disorganized. Nothing happens. There's not this one group that controls every little move and everything. And the assassination was fake, and all of that. And Trump faked his own assassination and all. Right? It's just they're going down that dark rabbit hole without any solid proof. By the way, it's all projection and assumption. Number one, or just very distorted. You know, like, you look at some of the videos people send me, and it's ridiculous.
But and they might say to me, oh, you're projecting your thing. I'm like, okay, fair play. Maybe I am. Maybe I'm coming to my conclusions because of my own internal biases. Guess what my bias is? I want to save Western civilization. I want to see a future for my children. I want to live in freedom. I don't want to live in slavery and tyranny and evil running the roost. And just because Western institutions and our governments and everything have been infiltrated by an enemy that seeks to destroy those things doesn't mean we destroy the civilization that literally brought light to the world. Okay. It just means we've got some rot that needs to be cut out as corruption comes and the weeds grow around the garden when you don't take care of it. Doesn't mean you nuke your garden, right? With, you know, Roundup. You go and you get those weeds out, and then you get the soil to become more fertile, and you let your, you know, thing grow again.
Exactly.
This is the difference. They go, sorry, go ahead.
No, just wanted to note, that's one of my sayings. We need to clear out the weeds, right, for the garden to grow, but then we also must not to forget the flowers that are already there and water them.
Exactly. And the thing is like, you know, I tell these people just really quick on the whole going to start your own hippie commune off the grid and leaving the matrix where you become sovereign citizens and live in a tire house. Hey, go for it. Don't skip the chapter on studying human psychology, please, and look at historical examples of where these things can go wrong. Now, that doesn't mean they can't go right. All right. But what are you going to do if, let's say, all of Western civilization gets melted down into the dystopian nightmare that is planned for it, should nothing stop it? And now you're living alone with maybe you start your commune with like 50 people, and then, you know, a bunch of shit happens and you probably reduce down to maybe 20 people left in the commune. And then China decides to step in. What are you going to fight them off? Well, no. So you're going to be stuck dealing with one form of attack against your ideals or another. And so it'd be better to put your flag in the ground and stand with people that you don't always agree with on everything, right? And fight this battle together, because we all are on the same battlefield. I look at it like the Lord of the Rings, chapter 3, Battle of the Black Gates. We've got the surviving Fellowship of the Rings. None of them all agree on everything. They all come from different backgrounds and perspectives of Middle Earth.
Yeah, but they trigger each other. They annoy each other.
They annoy each other. They fight each other. But yet their survival collectively is threatened against a common enemy. Also, the Game of Thrones show kind of highlights this, where like you have all these battles, and most of the show is all these dramatic battles between these families that are biting for power. Meanwhile, there's this common enemy slowly getting closer to the walls, right? These White Walkers. And so it's a very similar situation. And I would say, I don't think people have traveled much that come from a lot of these places. They usually are probably just parked in front of their computer watching the world through the lens of YouTube and X or whatever. But you really got to get around and see the reality of the human condition absent even the semblance of the original pillars of the West that's left. Like, yeah, we're not living the full best and brightest of our time in civilization because of what's going on. We're in a wartime scenario. But even with that, notice where all the migrants are fleeing to right now.
Yes.
They're not fleeing to Haiti. They're not fleeing to Venezuela or China or any. They're coming here, and there's a reason why. And it's because, yes, we've got problems. Yes, we've got a deep state. Yes, we've got all this stuff going on. Yes, there's been a crazy history, but at the same time, you still have more freedom here than you're going to have anywhere else in the world.
Absolutely.
And that's why when people tell me in Canada, they go, well, okay, you'll never get rid of Trudeau and Pierre, the new conservative guy. He's just another deep state puppet. So you're totally screwed. And I'm like, yeah, Canada's political plight is not very pretty right now. And they're like, yeah, so then you should move and you should go somewhere else. We're going to go move to Mexico. I'm going to move. There's Canada. Half of Canada is moving to Mexico right now. We're going to go move to the States. We're going to go this. And I'm like, so you're going to commit the same mistake as all of these other fallen states that are now mass migrating to escape their totalitarian regimes into the West, where the best and brightest of the people who were probably aware are, like, years ago, you used to come over here. Now they're just sending everybody. But now there's nobody to help fix those nations. There's nobody inspired to fix those nations. They're all over here, right? And now Canada, there's nobody that really believes in the patriots, the people that are awake are all fleeing Canada and going elsewhere. Well, then, yeah, Canada's totally going to be. So they're just abandoning ship.
Yeah, but that's also on that note.
My final point is that this is a globalist agenda. This is a internationalist agenda. So maybe there's a better place temporarily. But if this falls, if America falls and the West falls, the whole thing changes. The whole thing falls, right?
Yeah.
So there is nowhere to hide from this fight. It's
Thank
better
you
to
for saying
stick your foot in the ground
Yeah.
and fight where you stand.
No, that's why I've been talking about this, because I've seen this over the years as well. And I see it as a trauma response. People like freak out and like, I got to move. I see so many people from here. I've also moved to Costa Rica, Mexico, some of the tropical, like third world country. But the grass is not green on the other side. I've seen many people like come back actually because a lot of things they took for granted here, they don't have over there. And you cannot escape externally, exactly for the reasons. Number one, all is one. Wetiko goes everywhere with you, right? And number two, like, for some period of time, there might be positive change. Not positive change, but like a different scenario. You have the romantic phase, like if any relationship, but then reality will come down. And when the US falls, the world falls, everything falls, right? Up to maybe what we may have experienced back in Atlantean days, another divine truly pressing the reset button. We see this now. I think it just happened today, right? Trudeau totally supported the Ukrainian long-range missiles into Russia or something, right?
Right.
Like, let's
keep the wars going.
Along with World War III a little bit, right? Yeah.
Which we know is part of the 16-year plan. That was the plan.
Exactly.
The plan was to engage the world in World War III and then build this new empire out of the ashes. That was the plan. They needed West. You see, people forget about the reason they needed the West out of the way, this globalist agenda. We were the last target. They already went and mauled all the other countries and civilizations. They already been cooked. Okay. So these are people that, they are affected by that process. The West was the last to stand, and they needed to, and this is why they go, well, look at America with all its invasions and wars. I'm like, America was hijacked by these pirates and then used to keep the wars going, not for America, but for this globalist deep state, right? Yeah. So, and it's the same everywhere else. So they used us to get all of this stuff set up on the international level. And then now they're turning on us. And that's why there's so many traitors within our gates that are operating against our own best interest of the people living in France or UK or Canada or America. And what's crazy is that guess who told the mainstream about this and made this go viral? It was Trump. Guess who also has been talking about this from another angle on the pharma site and the agricultural? It was RFK Jr., right? Yeah. And even RFK Jr., there's things I disagree with him on, and he's not perfect, right? But Bernhard,
that's what I was thinking. Like sometimes the truth is they want somebody in power that exposes, according to them, everything, right? It's so unrealistic and nonsense. Even it doesn't even make sense. And I probably have been in that place at some place myself. I can look myself into the mirror, right?
Right.
But I want to point out, speaking of RFK Jr., what you just
Sure.
mentioned, this is the beautiful example of what you mentioned, uniting the clans despite certain disagreements. When RFK Jr. joined Trump, right, that day, that was just like, that was divine intervention in a sense. And I'm sorry, maybe it's hyperbole, but it was just amazing, energetic. If you could see that his speech was profound, also deconstructing the Democratic Party of today, and then him coming up with Trump, right, on and Maha and MAGA, and even like, what's his sidekick Nicole Shanahan, right? At first, like people are talking shit about her connections to Google. She's like ex-liberal, but I start to like her more and more. Like the videos she puts out, her points of view. And it's a beautiful combination because Trump has its own tunnel vision. He's being crude and whatnot, but then bringing the health aspect and other aspects from RFK Jr. It's amazing, right? This unification,
why would you sign up with him?
despite certain differences, is beautiful. Right. And I'm just to finish my point, and that's why. And there's still truths out there like, oh, this, Trump is like still the shit talking and the negativity. That shows me you have lost. You're so disconnected from the divine, from essence. You don't even can see anything positive anymore. You mechanically, like a little child projecting your father wound on authority, reject everything, right, without seeing some nuance of goodness in it and a positive. Doesn't mean that the world is saved, but that's why, like, for me, this is a big sign of somebody who really poops on all of that, is a lost soul in so many ways. I feel almost sorry for them, right? You're like lost in your dark hole of negativity on a very low level of consciousness. You're stuck in anger and the rabbit hole of intellectualizing the matrix. You don't see even like what's it saying, the tree, the woods for the trees, right? Like whatever the saying goes, because there's something good happening, right? And I've seen this, if you have, then going back to what we talked about in the beginning, if you have this more nuanced view, you also see then maybe more of a psychic vision. There's something good happening and positive. Doesn't mean that we're being bailed out by Trump. We need to play our part. We still need to do the inner work. The inner is a reflection of the outer. As a matter of fact, because of the awakening of many of us doing the work, there's also, we manifested almost this unification in itself, because all is one on a metaphysical level. And these are great news, but it's a war. We need to step up to the plate. It's not about hiding anymore. We didn't come here to vacation. Sometimes my little childish ego thing is also, I just want to be in Costa Rica on the beach, just going to massage therapist, fuck it. Like, no, right. I want to be here right now where I am, Arizona. This Trump RFK Jr. happened 2 hours away from where I live. It's really awesome. I want to be here in the midst of it. This is exciting. This is a great opportunity. It's going to be not easy, but it's worth fighting for. Like, that's even a line from Lord of the Rings, I think.
Yeah, yeah, it's worth. You got to believe that there's good in this world, and it's worth fighting for. Otherwise, you are going to be defeated. You can't fight an enemy without having the belief somewhere inside of you that you have the ability to win. Right? Yeah. You can't fight evil going, oh, evil's already won, but I guess I'll just keep fighting evil. Like, that's retarded. What are you doing? And then I think what it is, Bernhard, what you're mentioning with those people that are sort of, you're getting to the personal level of them kind of projecting their shadow and their inner wounds and their fears and everything. That's a product of mass mind manipulation and totalist mind control. They are demoralized. The demoralization operation complete. Like, that's where the enemy wants you. That's where manipulators and psychopaths and cult leaders and tyrants want you. They want you demoralized. They want you to think that the enemy is bigger than it is. It's like from Batman. He's like, I must become more than just a man in the eyes of my enemy.
They give it way too more power than it actually is worth. Yeah.
And that you give them more power. And these positive things you're seeing, and I'll just say it really quickly here. The woke mind virus. We've been calling it the woke mind virus, right? Yeah. Elon called it the woke mind virus. Okay. And I would just say that the woke mind virus, with all this stuff that's been done to divide and cause these inner strifes, it's a weaponized package that was created and then launched onto the Western psyche. Okay. And it's already been applied globally as well. So if anybody, I don't care if Ebenezer Scrooge comes out and starts saying it. I don't care if Mao Zedong is resurrected from the grave and comes out and starts calling out the woke mind virus. I don't care if anybody is drawing attention to that and having millions and millions of eyeballs on that, and they're having an influence, and they're drawing attention to the arrows being shot at us right now, which is that, then I'm like, how can you not be like, okay, thank you, Psy-Op. Thank you, Illuminati agent, for pointing out the weapons of that evil. Like, if you know what I mean? So it sounds ridiculous to me when people see these positive things taking place and they can't give any credit. See, when they can't see, I can sit here and critique some of the Trump policies and some of the actions he took. I can critique Elon Musk. I have no problem. I'm not attached to these people. Okay.
Yeah.
But I see how important they are at this time in history. And trust me, the future historians have something to write. And I can see, as you were saying, that divine force works in mysterious ways. It works through the most unexpected people. And for anybody to sit back and go, yeah, but anybody but them, because this and that and that, I'm like, then you believe that you are having the divine force work through you only, and it's exclusive territory. And everybody else,
very Luciferian, actually.
Like everybody else is everybody else is obscured from that. You're not taking the full picture into being that the potential for the power of truth can hit anybody's mind at any time. You can have the most evil, villainous, I don't care if it's like one of the Habsburgs or the Rothschilds or something, suddenly wake up and go, guys, fuck, holy shit, we can't do this. Like, and start saying, nobody would believe them. But the thing is that anytime anybody can wake up. And I'd say that you were asleep once upon a time and you forget that. You were buying into what the media was telling you. You were programmed by the Matrix. Yet you're not going to give quarter to any of these other people that might wake up and go, holy shit. Like Elon Musk came out and told the story of what happened to his kid. How do we know that wasn't the moment that he just actually was telling you the truth and said, I had a personal thing that happened. It woke me up to what was really happening here. I kind of fell for it. He was honest. I fell for it. Yeah. I woke up. I lost my child over this. I'm fighting back and I swore to fight against it. Now, the only argument the black pill person on him can say is, oh, he's lying. That's the only argument, but there's no evidence that he's lying because he's actually taking steps to expose it, right? So, and even if he was, even if, let's just give them a benefit of the doubt and say, yeah, you're all right. They're all evil. They're all trying to do something. Isn't it weird that their actions are helping to wake up common people that we couldn't wake them up, Bernhard? You and I tried. Alex Jones tried. David Icke tried. Bill Cooper tried. Gilbert Griffin tried his whole life, bless his soul, right? Like we tried and we failed on those people, but for some reason, these people were able to help wake them up and get them paying attention to literally the information we've been talking about, right? Yeah, it's on a basic level, but where do you begin? Do you begin at black belt with people or do you start at white belt?
Exactly.
You know
what comes up for me too, a lot of the black people, especially of the past few years, if you have such an absolute view, oversimplified, black and white, very attached, like there's TDS in the truth movement too, by the way, obviously.
Oh, absolutely.
But you're so attached to like Trump is part of the deep state, part of the cabal. He's the invasion, like, and you pound this over and over and you get more following. A lot of popular quote unquote truthers, and they attract other black pillars like a black hole vortex of their own shadow projections kind of converging because they feed on each other's negativity. But the more you have this absolute views, reminds me, going back to the map of consciousness by David Hawkins, they're stuck in pride, the critical level, meaning pride. They're so identified with their view, externalizing everything, and so identified that their whole self-image depends on it. They don't have the ability anymore to admit, like, hey, maybe it's not that, I could be wrong about this. Maybe it's not that black and white. Maybe it's a bit more nuanced. The ability to admit to that would then get on the high levels of consciousness opening up, right? But they would get attacked by their following where they feed off this negativity. And it creates true courage in the form of humility to admitting to yourself, hold on, maybe it's not black and white. Maybe there's some goodness. Maybe there's actually better. Maybe it's not this oversimplified, doesn't matter who becomes president, the president is all part of the club. Maybe it's more beneficial right now if Trump, with all his imperfection, actually gets into power rather than Kamala and her neo-Marxist globalist agenda, right? But pride is the downfall.
Well, and also the one point we can kind of wrap with here to finish this up is to say that there's this issue that I've noticed with people is that they become addicted to the drama and they become addicted to the abuse. And this, if you studied like Stockholm syndrome and the guilt complexes and cult mentality and how they brainwash people, why do abuse victims return to their abusers for more abuse?
Yeah.
Why? This is the question nobody wants to answer. Why do people keep voting in dictators that are clearly dictators? Why do people clap and cheer for open evil and anti-human ideology? Why? What is it about that? Well, there's something that's that you can call it Wetiko, you can call it trauma-based, whatever, you can call it just human psychology, doesn't matter. But when you take that piece of the puzzle off the board and you only focus on those people doing it to us, right?
Yeah.
If we only focus on Jim Jones as a cult leader and that he had 1,000 people commit mass suicide together, if we only focus on Jim Jones, we are eliminating half of the equation of what really happened there. Jim Jones didn't just create himself. He was also assisted in the creation of him becoming a very dark psychopath near the end by the people that were part of that cult with him.
Yes.
Right? There's a relationship between the master and the slave, between the tyrant and the tyrannized. And this is what we've been trying to hit on the head for years on Unslaved. Michael's work got into this, and other great thinkers have got into this, but they're not heard of because people just want to have a punching bag to take out their inner frustration and the feeling of helplessness on. And that's why they need a group to blame for everything. And they need to not allow in their minds the possibility of any good things happening, because they've become addicted to that programming that good things don't happen here. And it feeds into that self-hate and the hatred of the consequences of facing reality that they're so afraid of. And it's easy to project that, right? So just wanted to point that out.
Very, very good point. Very important. I wrote an article a couple of months ago when the Trump assassination happened titled "Woke Leftist, Black Pill Truthers, Divine Grace, and the Hero Archetype." I'm almost making a correlation between woke leftists and this new breed of like negative black pill truthers stuck in this victim consciousness of external blame, right? And this endless cycle of victim perpetrator. You made an excellent point. I've seen this also, you know, back in the days, many people speak out against for pathological cult leaders or pathological spiritual leaders have been abused their groups and whatnot. And everybody wants to just cancel them and demonize them. But the most important part taken out of the equations, like you said, is like, why were you, or people who feel victimized by this and that, why were you attracted to this person to begin with? What got you into that? Why did you believe them, right? That cult mindset that gets people hooked into all of this, right? And this, in the same way, you made an excellent point. The Stockholm Minder said, not only that, but this lower state of consciousness of this consistent negativity, black pill, they feed off of the drama, right? It almost sustains them because of their own. It's, by the way, we call it the conspiracy bypass, because of their own unrecognized trauma, unhappiness, misery, and everything they want to avoid within themselves. They project it all externally. They need almost mechanically feed on all these negative black pill conspiracies to make themselves feel better about themselves. And unconsciously, I tell you, they want the world to go to shit because they have an unconscious self-hatred death wish, right? That then they recreate this externally, and then these, through Psyops, these occult forces, they know our psychology better than we know ourselves. They use it against them. And that's how they create their reality through them.
So well said. And the one thing I'll say is, you know, this like Extinction Rebellion thing, like with the climate, right? And they did these mock drown-ins and mock die-offs and stuff. So they pretend that there was like mass death, and they're basically recreating the Jim Jones cult. And I went, okay. And everybody from the other side would say, "Oh, look at them! They're so stupid. They're suckers for abuse and this and that, and they're in this conscious." And then I'm like, "Oh, wait a minute! I'm seeing this happen in exactly the way you've just described. The same mentality of being attracted to what Freud called the death instinct, and then there's other thinkers later that refine that a bit better than he did, I think. And it's this like." His vision of the death instinct was that it was sort of a natural process that takes hold in your old age, or maybe moments before you realize you're going to pass, that help your psychology move into that death mindset to allow that life to unravel. It's like there's an unconscious mechanism he was trying to get at. Well, what these death cults have done is play on that device. They've played on that little instinct. And they've sort of weaponized it in a way to to cause a false knee-jerk reaction in the psyche, so that it does it prematurely. And this is why these cults Polar Temple, all the are all suicide cults and murder cults. So they're cults of death. They're death obsessed. They're not they're not empowered by life. The rhetoric is not about living life in like a Viktor Frankl or someone would tell you, right? They're about death. And
it's anti-life, literally.
And they get obsessed with that side of it. Now, the person operating in that frequency is not going to identify it consciously. They're not going to self-reflect enough to know that that's what they're engaging in, right? Which is why it's effective. And so, but it is part of this demoralization package that I've been trying to warn people about, because, and this is where I'm at, Bernhard. I think that the real conspiracies, if you will, and I sometimes don't use that word because I feel like it's just too much baggage, but you know what I mean. The real criminal, agenda-driven occult policies, okay? There are those, but they need to surround that with the fake version of that, right? So I think they've done, and those conspiracies, you can always identify them by the way of the demoralization factor. So think of which ones start to attack Western civilization as a whole, right? I even controversially was like, let's reinvestigate the moon landing conspiracy from this perspective, right? And just quickly, and I wasn't there. I don't know what happened. I don't know what went down. Maybe they didn't go. Maybe it was all faked. Maybe it was. Maybe they didn't show. I don't know. Let's just leave that aside, okay? But what if I just threw a different theory at you? And this is how I put it out. And I couldn't believe the amount of trolling I got for just proposing it. I'm like, okay, you gave your conspiracy theory that they faked the whole thing and it was all staged by Stanley Kubrick in Hollywood and they didn't show us and they're all Illuminati or whatever. I was like, okay, there's that. That's one theory. Maybe that's what it was. But another conspiracy could be that what was the number one accomplishment in human history that not only humanity made, but specifically America made? It would have been landing on the moon. Right? That's a pretty massive accomplishment, right? And who would like to throw egg on the face of that accomplishment in order to demoralize the American population? Well, it'd be the people that were trying to tell you that it was all fake and it didn't happen. And just like that little mini tyrant in your life would tell you that your greatest accomplishment, like that abusive father or uncle or whatever, would tell you your greatest accomplishment, you just graduated and they're just like, you're not good enough. It was all fake. You didn't even get a real diploma. Who the hell do you think you are? What does that do? It's a control tactic to demoralize you. Okay. So I'm like, what if the conspiracy about the moon landing is the conspiracy? Yeah. I was just putting it out as a,
no, I like that because I thought I jumped, early on, but then you have to, people just on their armchairs on the internet analyze pictures from the moon,
and good.
And they're about to be said, maybe there's that's I thought about this as well because I'm getting more away from having these very fixed views and like, definitely fake. But hey, what about if that's maybe not the whole, maybe it's not that absolute. Maybe NASA doesn't 100% lie to us, like I mentioned before. This very, again, extreme black and white view where you throw out the baby with the bathwater. And all that.
Maybe there was maybe there was a different lie they told us. Like maybe there was a lie. They definitely did Freemasonic rituals on the moon. Like there's like if you read Richard Hoagland's book Dark Mission, he's like, oh yeah, there was some definitely lies and conspiracy, and he gets into the Nazi connection and he talks about, he calls them like the I think it's like the warlocks, the Nazis, and the Masons that are all involved in NASA and everything else like that. But that doesn't mean every NASA employee is part of that. And that, again, so it's like throw the baby out with the bathwater. And maybe they had a different agenda to lie. And maybe they needed to hide that lie behind a fake lie. Right. Yeah. And so again, if we're talking conspiracy theories, why can't I come out and put a whole bunch of different versions with the same data on the table and suggest it and go, we got to think the truth movement used to be like this, where we could all go, yeah, maybe it was that. Maybe it was that.
Maybe like more scientific, right? Let's put this on the table and examine it.
Right. I'm still on team NASA lies, but not to the extent of, say, the flat earthers and the space is fake and they're like that's just like ridiculous. Okay. Yeah. But the thing is like, when I started doing this, and I did this show and I went through the history of the individuals that started talking about those things. The first guy to talk about flat earth was
you kind of laid it all
Christian socialist. from a
Interesting.
group called the Christian Socialists.
Yeah.
The first guy to start talking about the moon landing hoax was a American communist member, right? Did you know
Interesting.
that Richard
Okay.
Hoagland was there on the scene the day of the launch? He was a journalist at the time. He was
Yeah.
reporting it. And all the reporting, MSNBC, CNN were all there. He tells this story many times. He writes it in the book. And he was there. And he said, when the launch had already taken place, they're already up there. And already there's a guy walking around there's a JPL guy, Jet Propulsion Labs, right? Which works in tandem with NASA, walking around with this guy who's passing out these packages on the information of how the moon landing was a hoax. And he's handing them out to all these media desks.
Interesting.
Okay? On the day of the launch. And Richard's like, oh, what? And they handed out with it a package with this like flag that was folded up or something, and this whole thing. And he said they were giving this out on the day of the launch. And so he goes through this whole story, and his conclusion was that there was a conspiracy with NASA, but it was actually NASA and these rogue elements within NASA that actually started the moon landing hoax. And he said the reason they did that was to throw off the trail everybody that was starting to discover. At the same time, there was all these books coming out about the lost ruins that are being found all over the Amazon and ancient Egypt, about lost human civilization, and that we were at a very high point of civilization, and there may have been something else here. And he said they started finding the same kind of shit on the moon and Mars and everything else, and they didn't want that information to get out. And so they were covering up that with this other one. So that's one theory, right?
Yeah.
But I went, why would everybody that's down the whole, no, for sure it was a hoax, why can't you even entertain that? And when I started to see that they get super emotional about it, because I'm not attached. I know that there's bullshit, so maybe they did fake it. I don't care either way. I want to know the truth. But to know the truth, unless you were sitting there, okay, you got to be able to look at all these different theories from different angles. And we've lost that ability is what I'm saying. Okay. Yeah. So I started to become more of an advocate for that theory, not because I know for a fact it's true. I mean, nobody really knows. And it could go to any of the things we've talked about.
Exactly.
But where's the freedom in the freedom movement, for fuck's sake? Right?
So, yeah.
Like, are we thinking here, or are we just believing repeating mantras?
They call it shill CIA agent Illuminati for controlled op for making that point. You're trying to.
Oh, like seriously. So I even people listening to this, if we've triggered you, like fuck, get used to it. Like to think is to risk being offensive, right? And the point is in the end, what if we're all wrong? What if there's something even bigger and grander going on than any of us have even thought of? Or what if it's also, here's another thing that you could, as a possibility, what if most people working in these fields and industries, what if most people are just normal, they're good people, they're not meaning to be part of anything. Many of them are dupes and controlled and all that, but it doesn't mean they're all evil. And what if some of those controlled dupes working on the lower level started to wake up to things?
Yeah.
Did that have anything to do with all the whistleblowers that we've been seeing come out in the last 10 years? And and what if we're going to see more? And which presidency in America would facilitate more whistleblowers coming out? Would it be the Obama, Biden, Harris regime, or would it be the Trump, RFK, right?
Exactly.
And then people go, yeah, but you're still in the savior complex. No. I just want to move the needle. I just want the needle to move a little bit.
Like, how can people come, like, just because I think it's better, Trump is better, would be better just for everything that's happening in the world. Oh, you're buying into the savior program. Like, no, I'm not. Like, the strong arguments is just insane. By the way, real quick, I have a question on that. I know you know Richard Dolan, right?
Yes.
I'm curious, what is his view on the moon landing? Is he kind of like more full on fake, or he has some other?
Oh no, he thinks it. I've asked him before. Well, the last time I talked to him, let's just put it like this, it's been a while, been a few years. But last time I talked to him, he was like, "Oh no, they went to the moon, but they just didn't show you what happened when they went there." That's what any fake footage or any missing footage or any weird shit with that was to cover up the real story. That he's like, but they definitely went. He said actually his contention is that the secret space program was already in place. And that what we've seen with NASA is the reason it's kind of a dog and pony show is because they're trying to keep the illusion alive that that's the pinnacle of space travel, right? which is why it's interesting that you now have these independent guys coming in like Musk and these other private space agencies, and now these other countries that are starting to pick up their game, which is going to change the whole paradigm, I think. But either way, he would say, and I've spoken to others that think this as well, that they're covering up a lot, and one thing they're covering up is just how far advanced they are technologically in the black budget world, right? And this is also now starting to come out more with this whole disclosure thing. And there's a Psy-Op disclosure camp, and then there's I think there's a legitimate disclosure thing going on camp. And so again, that's another one of these divisive issues. And Dolan has always been more, the pro-disclosure. I don't know if he's very hopeful it's going to happen soon these days, but on the moon landings, I'm pretty sure he would say we went, but we've been before. Actually, John Lear. Do you remember John Lear?
Yes.
I interviewed him before he passed away, and he said the same thing. He said, "Well, we've been doing missions to the moon since before the Apollo missions. Those just were the official ones." And we've gone further. He's like, our technology is well advanced in the deep space program. And we've gone much further. And there's basically galactic corporations running this shit. Wow. Okay. This is beyond Earth. Okay. At this point. And so that's what they're hiding is the bigger scale of what's going on. And whereas everybody's taking what they're seeing and they're concluding wrongly, and that was done by design. And that's being
I like this. It makes a lot of sense, even from a Psy-War perspective, the demoralization, right? Like that's similar, like not different than the woke left. Like, let's just put down all our culture, all our thinkers, all our achievements. It's all just destroy colonialism, and it's dirt. It's no good. You're not good. All of that, right? I can totally see that. And obviously also when you bring in the alien topic and advanced civilization, that you're right, there may be something on the moon they don't want us to know and see. And what better way to hide it by spreading the conspiracy? Well, we never really went to the moon.
Exactly. Well, there's even this debate in the whole ancient alien world too, or the ancient, the idea that, okay, if we're not alone in the universe, maybe something came here that was more advanced. It was perceived by ancient humans as being godlike, but it was really just, people with higher sophisticated technology. There's sort of that kind of theory, right? And whether people buy it or not, the interesting divide there in that there's a division in those movements about whether or not the ancient gods or the ancient astronauts or whatever were purely just like anti-human and they were evil, or whether they were all our space brothers and they were just our buddies, right? Like, some of these guys kind of conclude that, or there's people that are kind of sitting in the middle and they go, well, there's always the discussion about the two brothers in religion and mythology that are antagonistic towards each other. You got Horus and Set, you got Jesus and Satan, you got, all these, and maybe, and Enlil and Enki in Babylon, Sumerian. And maybe what we've seen is that there was something there that was both. Like we saw a sort of a split camp of whoever was a part of our ancient history. And that's why that battle has continued throughout our current time, is that there's factions of, just call them advanced civilizations that are not part of our civilization, however you want to view that view humanity as a failed experiment and would like to remove us from the planet so it can be terraformed and taken over by them. And then the other faction that says, no, it was a positive experiment and we want to help them grow and thrive, and mentorship and all that. And so, these are all just theories. I have no idea. I'm just telling you what the split in that camp is. And so what's interesting, Bernhard, is that all these different rabbit holes, because we don't have conclusive evidence on any of them, it's left to speculation. And then there's disinformation purposely put into these mixes. And then the average Joe sitting there looking on the internet with what they allow you to see is making conclusions off what they're coming to. And none of us know what's really going on. That's where I'm at. It's so big. Everybody's wrong. That's right.
That's where the humility comes in, right? Honestly, that's where I'm at as well. Like the more I think I know, the less I know, like the saying goes, right? And you just got to be more detached and not take absolutist views and be so attached to certain ideas. Especially the issue is the emotional attachment to certain views and all of that, as you mentioned. Right?
That's it. Well, Bernhard, man, I think we've talked about probably every subject that exists. Like, that's amazing. Well done, man.
That was awesome.
We should do this again. I hope
Yeah.
people enjoyed it. And just thinking outside the box, just trying to make sense of the madness. Everybody should keep looking into these things themselves. They should go follow your work. You create, I love how you will write on different angles of subjects, and and you're just always talking. And I love that you bring the personal aspect to this. Always. You're always coming back to the self and the individual. And because that's the only domain, right, that we have
Yeah.
any control over.
Exactly.
And,
Exactly.
and that's where we should focus. If I can't by myself go and save the world from the deep state or the evils or the tyrants or the cults,
Yeah.
well, then I shouldn't beat myself up doing that. I should just do what I can and focus on at least doing what I can for myself and my family and the work that I can do, but to remain sort of unattached to the outcome, so to speak. Is
Exactly.
that what you would say?
Absolutely. For me, that's why I'm in my place. I would call it surrender to God, to the divine. That
Yeah.
the ego thinks is defeatist, but that's on a higher level. This is actually more Zen approach, more like detachment in a healthy way, not dissociation, but also recognizing, as you mentioned, there's things way beyond our control of our little personality things it can control. There are bigger cycles happening, evolutionary cycles, karmic cycles. Certain things just need to play themselves out that have been put into motion for thousands of years. And we can still react through choice by the input and stimuli, but there are bigger forces at work, also bigger divine forces, not just evil forces. So that's one of my last point.
Yeah, that's my favorite statement, and I love it. Someone said it to me, and I say it all the time, and I'm like, man, evil is not the only force at work in this world.
No,
It's not you and I are sitting here right now trying to find out what is goodness, and we're trying, what is truth, what is free, what are we, and so if you exist listening to the show right now, and you are on team freedom, truth, justice, prosperity for humanity, a future for our children, right? A sane world, a rational world, right? If you're on that team, then you're representing the goodness that everybody's pretending doesn't exist. Okay.
exactly.
So just you, it could exist, and you could be the only person on this planet that is operating from that place. And goodness has not been extinguished. Freedom has not been extinguished because you exist. And if you sit there and realize that you are backed up by the divine forces of this universe, however you want to call it, or even just nature itself or God, or however you want to view that, then you're not alone in this. And there's no reason to be stuck in fear, doom, gloom, despair, and thinking that there's no hope. In fact, if there's ever no hope, it's because people stop creating it and stop believing in it. That's when it's hopeless. Just go read the survivors of these horrible totalitarian regimes and how quickly hope was extinguished and how it went to shit from there. So I'm not talking about hopium. I'm talking about rational hope that is required for victory over this. All right. And that is what's going to be the guiding light. So it comes back, be the change, be the force of trying your best to advocate for what you believe in. And don't let the wiles of the enemy get you down, and don't let these people turn your ear into believing that there is only evil things happening. I definitely disagree with that, and that's why I love what you do, Bernhard, as well, because you're on that team, and we need to give people a reason to stand up right now, and that's what I want to try to accomplish. And I appreciate you joining me here to help me accomplish that today, brother.
Yeah, appreciate you, David. Thank you. Awesome.
You too. All right. Oh, please tell everybody where to find all your stuff and any latest things you want to let people know about what you're doing.
Yeah, go to my website, veilofreality.com. You also have access to our podcast there, the Cosmic Matrix podcast, usually hosted by my wife, Laura, and myself. We have over 140 episodes. You can find it Apple Podcasts, Spotify, talking about these different topics about inner and outer work. I have some courses on my website too, and the big course with my wife, 14-week group coaching program, Embodied Soul Awakening. You can find that at thattimeoftransition.com. And that's it.
Amazing. Amazing. Go check it out, people. We'll do this more. Stay tuned.
Yes.
Catch everybody next time.